Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, Parallel Deku. Back with another fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Became a Healer Hero? Now before starting, please give this video a like. And subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Deku stands on the ledge of the school building, debating whether to jump. He thinks about the bullying, about having no quirk and no future as a hero. He believes his parents love him, but he imagines they might be happier without him. He has already written a note explaining his love for them and his admiration for Kaken and All Might, and he plans to make his death look like an accident so they will eventually get over it. Bakugo arrives on the rooftop with a shout, startling Deku. Deku manages a smile, telling himself he hopes for a quirk in his next life and that he hopes Kaken becomes a great hero. Tears stream down his face, but now he feels relieved. He waves goodbye with the biggest smile he can force. As he begins to fall, Kaken blasts toward him, his expression showing a rare fear. Kaken wraps his arms around Deku and holds on, ordering him to hold on. Deku clutches at him in panic, legs around Kaken's waist. Kaken grits his teeth and uses controlled explosions to slow their descent and create footholds along the building, bracing against the wall and bearing the strain as he guides them down. His face is tight with effort and pain, but he keeps going until they reach solid ground, always keeping a hand beneath Deku to make sure he is safe. Deku closes his eyes and focuses on his breathing, hands shaking as he struggles to steady himself. He is stunned that someone who has bullied him would risk himself to save him. When he opens his eyes and sees the damage to the school, he looks up at Kaken and suddenly bolts away, mumbling apologies and promising to leave. Kaken grabs his attention with an angry, pained outburst, demanding to know what Deku was thinking. Deku collapses into a ball, ashamed and terrified of what will happen next. He lashes out in a choked, emotional torrent, telling Kaken that he lives with being bullied every day and that he feels worthless, that even so he still wants Kaken to be a hero. Overwhelmed, Deku runs, adrenaline propelling him through crowds without regard for where he is going. His legs and lungs burn as the adrenaline fades. He eventually finds himself in a park in an unfamiliar neighborhood and collapses onto the grass beneath a cherry blossom tree. He lies there, breathing hard, tears still wet on his face. Petals fall onto his uniform and into his messy hair. He cries for his failures and for the fear that he cannot escape. After a while, Kaken appears again and sits quietly nearby. Deku curls up, expecting another confrontation, but instead Kaken remains beside him. When Deku finally turns and asks why Kaken is there, Kaken admits that he saw something he never wanted to imagine and that, strangely, he now has a new goal. His voice is softer and unexpectedly warm as he tells Deku this, leaving Deku uncertain but moved. He glanced from the corner of his eye, but Izuku was too tired to show anything more than a nervous, unsure expression. Kaken admitted that he believed one day he would become the #1 hero and then said he wanted to be Izuku's #1 hero. Izuku was taken aback. The idea felt like an apology and made him unexpectedly happy and confused. When Izuku looked down, he saw Kaken's hand. Even exhausted, Izuku sprang up and took it. Kaken must have gotten it while saving him. Izuku noticed blood and immediately acted, removing his school jacket and tying the sleeve around Kaken's injured hand. Kaken's hands were badly injured, swollen and bandaged. He had clearly taken serious damage. Kaken glared at Izuku, but his eyes were softer than usual, and Izuku felt guilty for causing those injuries. As Izuku wished he could heal Kaken, his hands began to glow green. They felt cool and numb, like they had been plunged into ice water, and the glow cast an emerald light into the darkening sky. For a few seconds the light pulsed, and Izuku was terrified to move. Kaken, equally shocked, pried Izuku's hand away. When Izuku's jacket slipped down, Kaken's hand looked whole again. Kaken told Izuku that he might no longer be quirkless. Izuku repeated to himself that he had a quirk. He held Kaken's hand gently and looked up into Kaken's face, speechless and overwhelmed. He could not comprehend the revelation. He had healed Kaken. The world began to blur and his vision darkened. Kaken insisted they go to the hospital, but Izuku told him to check himself first before losing consciousness. Then everything went black. 2 hours later, Izuku woke to a bright light above him and shielded his eyes. Kaken stood by the bed. His torso was covered in bandages, and Izuku felt a brief flush of embarrassment at seeing him so exposed, but the relief at being safe pushed that aside. The events of the evening came back in a rush and Izuku panicked, leaping from the bed despite dizzy legs and stumbling into Kaken's chest. Kaken scolded Izuku and then, with a mix of sternness and relief, lifted him and spun him around. Izuku protested, telling Kaken not to exert himself further while injured. Kaken's tone shifted between hard and caring as he told Izuku not to underestimate him and to stop doing reckless things. He worried about the thought of Izuku disappearing and insisted he would be the one to look after him. He also warned Izuku to tell him if anyone else tried to interfere. Izuku took this as a clumsy, honest apology and smiled despite himself. Kaken handed Izuku his phone and told him to call his parents. Izuku dialed his mother, who answered immediately and began to cry when she heard his voice. It took half an hour to calm her and explain that he would be home soon. Kaken stepped in and offered a simple explanation that they had been training in the park, which eased her worry. The nurse came in while Izuku was still on the phone, and Kaken took care of the paperwork for their discharge with practiced ease. As they left the hospital to go home, Izuku found himself saying the words he never expected to say to Kaken. Kaken sked and maintained a stern glare, but it was gentler than before. They walked through the quiet neighborhood under streetlights and stars. The cool air made Izuku shiver, and Kaken placed his blazer over Izuku's shoulders, revealing how much broader Kaken's frame had become. Izuku had memorized details of Kaken's growth before, but seeing him like that now made him feel both small and safe. The reality of how close Izuku had come to not making it hit him, and tears sprung to his eyes. Kaken shouted in surprise at the sudden outburst and, Izuku, unable to form a steady sentence, confessed that he had almost died and apologized for getting Kaken hurt. He stumbled through his words, voice shaking. Kaken looked at him, then prodded him with a mixture of irritation and rough affection. He told Izuku that he was not going to die on his watch and demanded that Izuku be smarter and trust that Kaken would save him if needed. The harsh words carried an unmistakable promise of protection. Bakugo declared that he would not only be the #1 hero, but also the protagonist's #1 hero, his voice a softer version of its usual gruffness. The tears began to clear as the protagonist calmed down and collected himself. When he reached his apartment complex, he called out to Bakugo, asking him to keep his quirk a secret for now. He explained that he did not want people to know yet because he wanted to practice and maybe tell his mother later. He added that it was a rush and he needed time to think, then thanked Bakugo and hurried inside before Bakugo could reply. Bakugo watched him go, a faint flush on his face that no one would have noticed. Time passed. Bakugo's teasing continued, but his treatment of Izuku softened. Anyone who threatened Izuku would quickly regret it. Izuku told his mother about his quirk after she accidentally burned herself making dinner. She fainted in shock, then cried when Izuku explained how he had discovered his ability, omitting some minor details. Because of his fascination with quirks, Izuku quickly understood how his worked. His quirk allowed him to heal others as long as he could imagine the part being restored. He devoted himself to studying human anatomy and anything related to health. He also learned he could sense when someone felt pain in a specific spot, which helped him diagnose problems quickly. The downside was that using his power too much left him exhausted and sometimes numb in his hands, though it did not cause lasting damage. The quirk proved useful in public emergencies, though Izuku usually hid his identity and avoided attention. One day, while walking home with Bakugo, they were attacked by a villain. Izuku panicked at first, terrified that Bakugo might die. When heroes nearby hesitated, Izuku decided he could not stand by. He ran toward the monster and, through flames, threw his book bag at it and clawed at the shifting dark mass, desperate to help. He urged Bakugo to fight and pleaded silently for someone to intervene. All Might suddenly arrived and quickly subdued the villain with impressive force. He pulled Bakugo out of harm's way and tossed both boys aside as if they were rag dolls. All Might unleashed a powerful technique that ended the threat. Izuku, in pain and shaken, assessed Bakugo and noted bruising and signs of internal strain. He planned to stabilize him but felt too weak to do much as paramedics arrived to assist. Paramedics treated the boy's visible injuries and released them to go home. Bakugo still looked angry, and Izuku, with a growing headache, stabilized him before returning to his apartment to rest. As he walked home, still jittery, he was stunned to see All Might in his public pose addressing him. All Might thanked him, which left Izuku baffled. He insisted that All Might had saved them both and that he should be the one expressing gratitude. As they spoke, Izuku felt a sudden, sharp concern when he noticed All Might's condition. All Might appeared pale and drained from the fight. Without thinking, Izuku placed his hand over All Might's chest and concentrated on repairing the damaged tissue. He imagined the muscles and structures beneath the skin and the circulation that sustained them. He recalled his training and his understanding of how the body worked, and he focused on restoring function. All Might sounded surprised but grateful and asked what Izuku's quirk was. Izuku explained that he had a healing quirk and often felt others' pain, which prompted him to help immediately. He admitted that using his ability made him tired. All Might reassured him that it was not his fault and asked for more details about the quirk, noting that he felt lighter and more capable after the help. Izuku felt the toll of the effort, and the world around him dimmed as exhaustion overtook him. Suddenly, everything went black. This was a really strange day. Izuku heard someone remark that a boy with a healing quirk would naturally come here, and he recognized the familiar booming tone as All Might's. His head throbbed and his hands went numb again. A woman explained that she had known right away that he seemed angelic. Izuku blinked awake to see Recovery Girl, All Might in his slim form, and a very cute white bear. Recovery Girl asked if he felt all right. Izuku scrambled into a kneeling position, bowed his head slightly, and introduced himself as Izuku Midoriya, apologizing for troubling them. Recovery Girl praised him for how well he had healed a set of bones and admitted she had not expected his power to be so strong. Izuku wondered to himself why she could heal others but not All Might. Recovery Girl asked his name again, and he answered, still trembling a little and curious about where he was. The bear and the slim All Might both listened as the man in the suit introduced himself as the principal of UA Academy and presented Izuku with a proposition. The principal invited Izuku to take the entrance exam, assuring him that with good grades and a healing quirk he would not be overlooked. He mentioned hearing that Izuku was a capable strategist and said he would be waiting for his reply. Izuku answered with excited gratitude and bounced on the bed. The three adults laughed, then grew serious. Recovery Girl warned that field training would be tough and asked if Izuku could keep up, gently patting his hair. Izuku smiled up at her and affirmed that he could. When Izuku went home and told his mother, they cried together. The next day he told Bakugo, who smirked and shouted that now he would have to go to UA too and wondered who would protect Izuku. Bakugo laughed and flashed his intense grin. The boys trained and studied hard. Bakugo still slung insults occasionally, but he had softened from before. Under Recovery Girl's guidance, Izuku learned to control his healing quirk better and began to develop a stronger physique. The day of the UA exams arrived. Izuku and Bakugo both took the tests. Izuku passed thanks to his intelligence and, during the practical portion, focused on supporting his peers and healing anyone who was injured rather than engaging in combat. He kept his identity concealed beneath a mask and hoodie. When the acceptance letter for the hero course arrived, Izuku showed his mother and wept with joy. He called Bakugo, who had also been accepted. Bakugo scolded him over the phone for underestimating him but celebrated that they would be at UA together. The two boys, as close as they had been in childhood, were now heroes in training. Izuku adjusted his tie nervously as he walked toward Bakugo's house, hoping Bakugo would walk with him to school. He had woken early, too excited for his first day to sleep more. He checked his phone and received a good luck message from his mother, which made him smile, but there was no reply from Bakugo. He told himself not to worry. Bakugo finally stepped out of his house with his usual stern expression. Izuku greeted him awkwardly. Bakugo brusquely told him to hurry if they did not want to be late and led the way towards school. Izuku trailed behind, chatting about the All Might figurine he had bought with his allowance after saving up and doing small jobs around the neighborhood. He thought about his childhood hero and how he would have to help and heal him when needed. He also noticed All Might's stubbornness about accepting help, but new progress was being made. By the time they reached the UA gates, Bakugo was snapping at Izuku to be quiet and blaming him for any tardiness. As Izuku scrambled to keep up, he noticed a small child crying nearby with a scraped knee. He could not leave the boy in distress. He ran over and found two boys, one trying to comfort the injured child with a handkerchief. Izuku sat beside them and asked if they were all right. Both boys nodded, relieved. He introduced himself as Izuku Midoriya and learned that they recognized the UA uniform. When he explained that he had been accepted because of his healing quirk and asked if he could check the scrape, the injured boy hesitated briefly then nodded. Izuku gently took the handkerchief and placed his hand over the scraped knee, imagining the tissue repairing itself. Within seconds, the scrape had vanished. A short bridge of quiet followed as the children absorbed what had happened, and then they resumed their walk to class. The boys lit up with awe as I took out my handkerchief to wipe away the dirt and then placed an all-might band-aid on the little boy's knee. I couldn't help but smile back at them. The boy shouted his thanks. I giggled and helped him up. The two boys ran off waving goodbye. I waved back, then realized I had lost Kaken and sighed, beginning my journey again as my nerves started to fray. Class 1A, where are you? This place felt huge. I found the door and saw how massive the classroom was. Maybe I'll have a nice class without Kaken. I thought I might die if he was in my class again. It was true he had been nicer lately, but that didn't change the fact that he still scared me. Now that I thought about it, hadn't he been accepted into the hero course? Maybe we were in different classes. The odds of us being together must be small. I told myself I might get a class that wouldn't make fun of me. I pushed the door open, expecting good things, and immediately felt my optimism wobble. Ilda, the blue-haired student, strode forward and ordered Kaken to take his feet off the desk. Kaken had his feet up like he owned the place and wore a devilish smirk. Ida accused him of disrespect and of acting like it was his first day at school, and Kaken shot back with a sarcastic retort that only made the tension thicker. I cowered back a little, wondering why the world seemed against me and what I had done to deserve this. I sighed and wondered aloud whether I really wanted to be a hero, the thought nagging at me more than usual. The blue-haired student walked toward me and looked a bit scary, but I tried not to let that stop me. I introduced myself as coming from semi-private academy and gave my name as Izuku Midoriya. Ida recognized me and mentioned my performance during the exams. A pink-haired girl bounced up and introduced herself as Uruaka, and I blushed and took a step back. I wasn't used to attention from girls. I stammered that my name was Izuku Midoriya and noted that she had the gravity quirk. A memory surfaced. I had been helping someone with a broken arm at the time. Recovery Girl had encouraged me to increase my endurance by treating as many people as I could and to act as an outdoor battlefield medic because she was no longer able to do that as much. Then a mob of students ran past me, and I noticed what they were fleeing from, a giant robot. I was about to run too when I noticed a brown-haired girl in danger. I couldn't just leave her. Acting on instinct, I ran toward her and managed to drag her out of the way of the robot's hand, throwing her into a nearby car to safety. The adrenaline and Recovery Girl's training helped a lot. I jumped onto the robot's hand as it began to raise. I remembered the schematics I had studied for medical supplies and climbed the massive machine, nearly meeting death a couple of times on the way. I prayed that my surgical mask and hoodie would hide me well enough. I reached the head of the robot and found a compartment. Using my medical tweezers and a burst of adrenaline, I opened the panel and chose which wire to pull. The machine lurched, so I grabbed a blue wire, ripping it free and cutting my hands in the process. The robot suddenly went slack. The machine started to topple forward. I panicked as I felt myself fly off. For a moment I braced for the worst, but then I realized I was floating. Looking up, I saw the brown-haired girl manipulating gravity to slow our descent. She had been using her quirk to keep us safe. I landed on my feet and felt incredibly lucky. I should check if she was okay, but I ducked away quickly to avoid drawing attention. The spotlight always seemed to find Kaken anyway. Back in the classroom, Uruaka expressed excitement about the first day and asked if the teacher would be stern. Ida suggested it was best to be prepared for at least a strict instructor, and Uruaka cheerfully proposed that we be friends. Ida complimented my enthusiasm and the others' costumes as everyone looked ready in their hero outfits. I pulled out my notebook and started recording everything. Kaken strutted in his costume and I felt a flush of admiration. He simply looked impressive. I tried to stay calm. Baka complimented my costume and called me cute, which made me jump and blush. Ida expressed sincere interest in seeing my quirk. I felt awkward but happy for the encouragement. My costume wasn't flashy. My mother had made it to keep attention away. A black surgical-style mask, a hoodie with an odd tuft that resembled All Might's hair, a spandex undersuit, a utility belt with supplies, and my favorite red shoes. We were assigned teams. I found myself partnered with Uruaka, and we were pitted against Kaken and Ida. The universe felt like it had a cruel sense of humor. Not only did Uruaka and I have more support-type quirks, but we were also facing Kaken. I helped Uruaka through the building obstacle course with steady guidance. I wasn't sure how long we could dodge Kaken. An explosion rocked the area behind us. Kaken had found us. He charged forward with a fierce look of ambition and anger, almost villainous in his intensity. I pushed Uruaka out of the way of the blast and braced myself for the confrontation, ready to protect my teammate. Izuku knew Bakugo's moves well. He dodged and kicked off a wall, aiming for Bakugo's face, but Bakugo moved just as fast and grabbed the back of Izuku's hoodie, blasting him backward. Bakugo shouted that Izuku could not beat him. Izuku growled, but he understood Bakugo. Izuku ordered Uraraka to go to the bomb. Uraraka hesitated and then hurried off to reach it. Izuku had to deal with Bakugo. He ran toward Bakugo and vaulted over his shoulders, taunting him and provoking a chase. That was enough to rile Bakugo and force him to pursue, so Izuku led him away until they reached a dead end where he had to stand his ground. Bakugo struck with an explosive impact that sent Izuku tumbling. Izuku bounced off the walls to avoid further attacks, recognizing the confusion in Bakugo's movements. Bakugo would fight seriously because he was Bakugo. He wouldn't hold back. Parts of Izuku's costume were singed, but he was okay. He pulled bandages from his belt. Recovery girl had taught him more than basic first aid. Using the bandage like a ribbon, Izuku wrapped it around Bakugo's leg and pulled to create an opening for strikes. Bakugo retaliated and blasted Izuku into a wall. Stars danced at the edge of Izuku's vision. Anticipating Bakugo's approach from the right, Izuku sprang to the left wall and launched a quick kick to his head. Then Bakugo blasted the walls, sending debris and dust scattering as the building around them began to crumble. The repeated impacts were making Bakugo unsteady and angrier. Izuku kept moving, landing well-timed punches and kicks, but Bakugo seized his ankle and flung him through the air. Izuku used the momentum to flip, land in a handstand on Bakugo's shoulders, and spring up. He pushed off and propelled himself away, but then he noticed the grenade built into Bakugo's costume. Fear spiked. If it detonated, it could be fatal. In a burst of desperate reflex, Izuku kicked Bakugo's arm hard enough to redirect the device. The building groaned from the damage, but help arrived just in time. Someone announced that the heroes had won, and Izuku felt relief flood through him. Uraraka had reached the device at the last moment. Bakugo, breathing heavily and looking dazed, threw Izuku against a wall as if in a trance. Both boys panted. Izuku's vision blurred, but he knew he had to help Bakugo. He staggered over and placed his hand on Bakugo's forehead. Bakugo had several bruises and signs of a concussion, but no severe injury. Bakugo swore at him, but Izuku focused, feeling a cool healing energy move from his heart, through his arm, and into Bakugo. He had once struggled to heal small wounds, but now he could mend concussions with effort. Within a short time Bakugo's condition steadied. Izuku's vision failed him and he slumped. Strong arms caught him as darkness closed in. He hoped Uraraka was all right. Third-person perspective noted that Izuku had passed out into Bakugo's arms like a wilting flower. Bakugo's scowl hardened into a stormy expression. He muttered that if Izuku was going to pass out, he should not be healing people, and barked that he would not let Izuku win next time. Despite the harsh words, Bakugo was shaken and worried. He carried Izuku in his arms and moved out of the damaged building, grumbling curses under his breath while trying to hide his concern. Bakugo looked down at Izuku, who slept fitfully, bruised and bandaged but stabilized. The boy looked peaceful, and Bakugo laid him gently on a stretcher and watched as he was taken to the nurse's office. He told himself he would deal with Izuku when he woke. An hour later, Izuku opened his eyes to bandaged arms and Recovery Girl sitting beside him. Recovery Girl spoke with a warm, scolding tone, asking if he felt better. Izuku rubbed his eyes and nodded. He had overexerted himself but would recover. Recovery Girl reminded him not to worry her like that and explained that she needed him well because of how busy things could get. She kissed the top of his head in an affectionate, grandmotherly way before dismissing him. Recovery Girl had become like family to Izuku. She often spoiled him with compliments and sweets, and he helped her with paperwork, healing, and other tasks. They had grown fond of each other. As Izuku stretched and prepared to leave, Recovery Girl commented on Bakugo's strength and flashy quirk while noting that Bakugo could be intimidating. Izuku beamed inwardly and thought about how fast and powerful Bakugo had been. The fight would make an interesting entry in his journal. Remembering his mother might be worried, Izuku hurried out to his class. In the hallway, his classmates greeted him. Uraraka jumped up, enthusiastic, praising Izuku's performance and asking if his quirk was related to agility or speed. Classmates expressed their admiration and asked to exchange contact information. Izuku was surprised but agreed, and they exchanged numbers before heading out. At the entrance, Izuku spotted Bakugo standing against a pole. He waved goodbye to his friends and ran over to Bakugo. Izuku collided into an eager, heartfelt hug and told Bakugo how great he had been and asked if Bakugo was hurt. Bakugo stiffened, surprised by the sudden display, and watched Izuku with a guarded but unsettled expression. Izuku rarely touched people after being bullied, and Bakugo had always been rough. When Bakugo reached out this time, Izuku jumped back, and both of them showed faint blushes. Bakugo roared that Izuku had been rash and should not have healed a villain only to pass out afterward, calling him a lousy hero. Izuku smiled and followed Bakugo, giggling like a small child. Izuku sat in his seat, excited for his first rescue practice session. Bakugo snapped at him to calm down. Izuku apologized to Kaken, explaining that he was just excited, and fastened his mask as the bus moved along. He had slight bags under his eyes from helping Recovery Girl the day before. Aizawa-sensei had needed his eyes checked and a headache relieved, and someone on the training grounds had been hurt and required his aid. Before long, Izuku fell asleep against his childhood friend's shoulder. A brown-haired girl wondered aloud about Ishido's quirk and what type of quirk Midoriya might have. A red-haired boy mentioned that Midoriya had beaten Bakugo and might have something flashy and secret, like a blade or an illusion. Another student observed that Bakugo seemed unusually close to Midoriya and suggested that anyone else who had touched him the way Izuku had might have paid dearly. Bakugo paid them no mind and continued to glare. They arrived at the training grounds and were met with chaos. On a small boat, Izuku found himself with Tsu and Mineta surrounded by a mob of villains. Mineta pointed out that Tsu's quirk would be especially effective in the water and suggested a plan. He then explained how his own quirk could be adapted, and both he and Tsu looked at Izuku for his contribution. Izuku blushed and admitted that he possessed a healing quirk that could mend most wounds. He produced a small black rectangle and, feeling nervous but determined, said that he had a plan. Izuku took a steadying breath and jumped off the boat toward the sea of villains, the rectangle growing warm in his hands. He threw the device into the water and directed Tsu and Mineta to act. Tsu dove and caught him, and Mineta launched his sticky spheres, enhanced with some metal wiring they'd improvised from the ship. Electricity arced through the water, followed by flashes that incapacitated the attackers. The group managed to reach shore, but the situation remained dire. On land, they were boxed in by more villains while their classmates fought elsewhere. The ringleader, a hulking man with many hands, regarded them with vacant eyes. Izuku felt the instinct to fight or flee, but another urge pressed on him, an overwhelming need to calm and heal. That intention was shattered when he saw the ringleader move toward Tsu with clear malice. Eraserhead had already intervened and stopped the man before Tsu could be harmed, giving Izuku a narrow opening. Seizing the moment, Izuku pulled bandages from his kit and cast them out like a whip, mentally urging Tsu to retreat to safety. The bandages were intercepted by the large villain. The man's face twisted into something inhuman and terrifying, and his body had become far larger than before. Izuku stepped back, frozen with fear, tears gathering as he imagined failing and Tsu being hurt. A booming presence arrived. The number 1 hero, All Might, had appeared and reassured everyone that help was there. Izuku rushed to Aizawa-sensei's side as All Might engaged the villain. He used the sponge in his utility belt to wipe away as much as he could and quickly assessed the teacher's condition. Aizawa showed signs of serious trauma. A head injury, severe damage to his arm, and significant impact to the base of his neck that threatened serious consequences if not treated. Izuku checked his pulse and felt it weaken. He placed one hand on Aizawa's wrist and the other along the base of his spine, focusing on stabilizing the teacher's core. He concentrated on the structure of the neck and spine, the way nerves guided muscles and ligaments, visualizing each vertebra and the flow of blood and nerve signals. Pain flared through Izuku's arms as he worked, but he pushed through, focusing entirely on restoring function. His hands began to glow with a bright, healing light. Wounds closed, damaged tissue smoothed, and swelling receded. Aizawa's eyes cleared and the exhaustion around them eased. The bruising and signs of impact along the neck faded. The effort took a heavy toll. Izuku's vision blurred and a deep, chilling fatigue settled over him far worse than anything he had felt before. He bit his lip and fought to stay conscious. He pressed every reserve into the healing, then slowly felt the immediate crisis stabilize. Breathing heavily, Izuku pushed himself to his feet. Recovery Girl had not arrived yet, and he still felt the urge to do more. The world around him was hazy, and distant sounds suggested the attackers were retreating and their classmates were securing the area. The thought of victory flickered through him, and relief that they had a chance to recover allowed him to focus on resting and recuperating. Izuku heard a faint voice and, through blurry vision, made out All Might in his muscular form engaged in battle. All Might looked better than before, but his breathing was clearly labored. Izuku did what he could to help, stabilizing him as best as possible, though his quirk was still new and he could not fix everything. He wondered if his classmates had been as lucky. He felt fortunate to have had the defibrillator battery, even if it had limited use now. Through the mist, Izuku saw Tamura and felt a surge of panic. He could not bear the thought of anyone dying. He pulled bandages and a syringe from his utility belt and injected an adrenaline shot into his leg to steady himself. The stimulant sharpened his focus and he ran like never before. Twirling the bandages, he launched them toward Tamura and then hurled a specially prepared tranquilizer. The sedative Recovery Girl had prepared struck Tamura, and the villain collapsed. Izuku tossed his badges for good measure, but something intercepted them. Someone called his name over the sounds of explosions. His vision blurred and his body no longer obeyed him. The adrenaline waned and he needed to heal others, especially All Might. The world went dark with ringing in his ears. When Izuku opened his eyes, he saw a familiar white ceiling. He felt a pounding headache and nausea, but he was alive and conscious. Recovery Girl sat nearby doing paperwork. She asked how he felt, and he told her, with a raspy voice, that he was okay. She smiled, ruffled his hair, and handed him a cup of tea from her thermos. Her quirk could not take away a headache, but her presence was comforting. They chatted briefly. Recovery Girl mentioned that Izuku's mother had invited her over the next day, and Izuku agreed that he would walk her to his house. As he pushed himself up from the bed, Recovery Girl suggested contacting his mother to bring him home or arranging a Izuku waved her off, insisting he could make it. His knees buckled before he reached the door, but he did not hit the floor. He opened his eyes to see Bakugo Kaken standing there, holding him over one shoulder. Bakugo told him to take better care of himself and insisted on taking Izuku home. He carried Izuku with one arm while holding their bags in the other. His strength was startling. Izuku felt embarrassed at being carried so clumsily but was grateful. He flailed and demanded to be put down, which only made Bakugo scold him in his usual gruff manner for being so weak and scatterbrained. Bakugo finally set him on his feet and continued to grumble, but Izuku noticed a small, calmer expression on Bakugo's face before it disappeared. Izuku thanked him and suggested they head home. Back at school the next morning, Izuku entered the classroom and was greeted by his classmates. Achiko Uraraka expressed relief that he was all right and remarked on how crazy the previous day had been. Tenya Ida, moving with his usual precise gestures, complimented Izuku on his fighting style and noted how quickly he had helped others. Izuku blushed and stammered that he did not know what they were talking about, hoping his quirks had not drawn more attention than necessary. Uraraka and Izuku took their seats while Ida moved through the class, telling everyone to sit down. All eyes turned to the door as Aizawa-sensei entered. He looked fully recovered. Relief swept through Izuku. He had worried he had not healed the teacher completely, and seeing him well eased that fear. Some students, including Denki, commented on the teacher's surprisingly quick recovery. Aizawa-sensei then asked for everyone's attention to announce something important. Aizawa-sensei explained that the UA Sports Festival was coming up. He described it as having once been a grand event and now functioning like a national showcase, with crowds and heroes who might recruit students watching. Excitement and nerves ran through the class. Denki asked whether it was appropriate to hold a festival so soon after the villain attack, and Aizawa-sensei assured the class that security and management had been reinforced and that they would be fine. Midoriya told Mineta that the sports festival was too big to cancel over a few villains. Mineta seemed uneasy and stammered that he had never seen the UA Sports Festival before. Aizawa glared at them and reminded them that they were expected to participate if they wanted to be professionals. Midoriya noted that Aizawa looked intimidating even after being healed. He decided he would check on him later. There was paperwork to do, but Midoriya tried to focus on being excited for the festival. Midoriya observed how everyone was energized about the event. Ida became animated and pumped himself up, and Tsuyu commented that Ida had a peculiar but endearing way of getting excited. Midoriya smiled at Ida's enthusiasm and thought of himself. Of course he felt the same, even if he worried he might not win. He clenched his fists and resolved to learn as much as he could from the experience. He announced that he, Ida, and Deku would do their best at the sports festival and urged his classmates to work hard. Uraraka grew serious, saying she wanted to become a pro to support her family. Ida cheered for her, and Midoriya admired her dedication. As they headed to lunch, Midoriya wondered if he should eat with them. He also felt responsible for keeping his new friends together. All Might arrived in a rush, calling out that Midoriya was needed. Midoriya worried briefly about whether All Might had worsened after the previous day and considered whether he should heal him some more. Midoriya decided to join All Might for lunch so he could check on him, and he told his classmates he would see them in class before leaving. In All Might's office, Midoriya noticed pain in his own hip and abdomen. Recovery Girl entered and assisted him. All Might quickly removed his outer clothing to reveal that his torso showed signs of serious injury. Midoriya felt alarmed. All Might confirmed that he had been hurt the other day. Midoriya unwrapped the bandages Recovery Girl had used and realized he could not fully regenerate All Might but could improve his health and extend his time as a hero for a while. Midoriya also felt his own mind in a haze. Memories of healing Aizawa were fuzzy, and a flash of memory left him disoriented. Recovery Girl's presence helped steady him until he refocused on All Might. All Might asked whether Midoriya was sure he still wanted to compete in the festival. Midoriya affirmed that he did. Being part of Class 1A meant training and experience that could be useful on the front lines. He insisted that his desire to help others was part of why he would participate. All Might smiled and gave him a thumbs up. He permitted Midoriya to use his bandages and assigned him to assist Recovery Girl during the festival, noting that she tended to be overwhelmed during big events. All Might placed a large hand on Midoriya's hair in a friendly gesture, and Midoriya felt briefly embarrassed. All Might reminded him not to forget his medication and promised to bring ointment next time to help with any skin irritation. When Midoriya and his friends opened the door at the end of the day, they found a large crowd of students blocking their way. Ida stepped forward to ask what business the crowd had with Class 1A. Mineta complained about not being able to get out. Bakugo strode by with his usual confidence but without yelling or causing harm, and Midoriya calmed his classmates by noting that Bakugo seemed to be in a neutral mood. A purple-haired student stepped in front of the crowd and accused the Hero Course students of being ignorant toward those in general studies who had tried to enter the Hero Course but failed to make the cut. He argued that the sports festival was their chance to claim what they deserved. Tension rose as Bakugo and the purple-haired student glared at each other. Midoriya felt uncomfortable with the confrontation and followed Bakugo as he pushed through, urging his friends to move along and avoid escalation. Bakugo grumbled that Deku should watch his scrawny butt out there and that he did not want to clean up his mess, not daring to look back. The narrator wondered if that was an attempt at protection and whether it meant Bakugo believed in him. He suddenly asked Bakugo if he thought he could be a hero, needing the honesty Bakugo always gave. Bakugo snapped that he would be number one and that the narrator would be right behind him, demanding to know if some JRK had tried to hurt him and threatening anyone who had. The narrator took that as proof that Bakugo still intended to be number one, and resolved to be the one to heal his wounds. Bakugo told him to quit laughing, called him a shitty nerd, and said he was heading home while the narrator could do whatever he wanted. The narrator sat in the waiting room nervously, checking his utility belt once more. Recovery Girl would be seeing him soon. Todoroki approached and bluntly said he was stronger than the narrator and that all might, Aizawa-sensei, and Recovery Girl had taken notice of the narrator. Todoroki made it clear he intended to beat him and that he was not there to make friends. The narrator accepted that Todoroki was better and replied that he would give it everything he had and that people could be surprised by what some could bring. Todoroki looked a bit surprised. It was time for the UA Sports Festival. The narrator had spent the night studying quirks and running. He did not expect to win but intended to give it his best. They walked onto the field where Bakugo climbed the steps to represent them. Bakugo stood in his usual cocky posture and pledged to be number one, which made the whole class glare in frustration at how he would make enemies for them. The narrator worried about being called on to treat Bakugo's wounds again. When classmates asked about his quirk, Ida looked on curiously. The narrator said that they would find out soon enough and explained that Recovery Girl had assigned him primarily to healing duty but allowed him to participate in certain exercises as long as he stayed uninjured and helped when called. They headed to the obstacle course for the first challenge. In the corner of his eye, the narrator saw the purple-haired boy, Shinso, who had seemed angry the day before but at least was quiet. Bakugo called for Deku and told him not to get hurt before walking to the starting line. The narrator registered that Bakugo was the only student who knew about his quirk and that Bakugo knew he could not heal himself, which felt like a kind of concern. That thought made him smile. Bakugo glared and then riled himself up for the obstacle course. The timer counted down and everyone took their starting positions, excitement passing through them as the crowd screamed. When the race began, the students in the hero course surged ahead. Bakugo, Ida, and Todoroki sped off. The narrator kept a steady pace that was faster than most. The first obstacle was the robots. The narrator had not seen their schematics, but the other students were already handling them. He scanned for injured classmates and spotted a support class student on the ground, clutching his leg. The narrator rushed over, urged the students to get to safety, and pulled the injured student out of harm's way. The injured leg appeared to be a sprain, and the student's friends had already run off. The narrator placed a hand on the injured leg. A familiar rush traveled through his arm and fingertips and the sprain was healed in an instant. He told the student to stay put. A robot turned to face them, advancing. The narrator ran and jumped onto the robot, climbed to its head where the sensor module was exposed, anchored his feet on the chassis, and gave a hard pull. The module detached with a sharp snap and the robot collapsed. He leapt off and landed perfectly, reminded that Recovery Girl had been right about practicing landings. He tossed the detached sensor module aside and it struck another robot, causing it to spark and shut down as well. He rubbed his hands on his clothes to get rid of grease and moved on, wondering where everyone else had gone. I glanced back and saw a student staring at me as if I had grown another head. The student asked if I was an angel. I shook my head and told him no, then reminded him that he should be running the course and showing off his gadgets. I also noted that anyone who felt unwell or was injured should alert me. I offered my hand and he accepted it with a smile. I looked down at the ground ahead. The path was full of landmines, but thanks to my bandages and an adrenaline shot I had caught up to Kaken and Todoroki. I couldn't afford to lose now that I was so close, so I thought of a way Kaken's quirk could be useful. I apologized silently to Kaken for borrowing the idea, pulled another box from my utility belt, and pressed a button to unfold my portable patient bed, made of stainless steel. My belt held most of the medical supplies Recovery Girl had given me. Many were designed to be indestructible for emergencies. As my classmates pushed ahead, I slammed the bed onto the ground. The mines activated and a fierce blast tossed me through the air. I held onto the rails and braced myself, my ears filled with wind and the ringing from the explosion. I kept telling myself I had to win, to prove I wasn't useless. I am Izuku Midoriya, and someday I will be a hero who can stand alongside Kaken. Kaken and Todoroki sped up, but I refused to fall behind. As I fell back to the ground, I tucked my legs and struck both of their backs to push off, sending the bed skidding in front of me. When it hit the ground, another shockwave launched me forward. I used the bed like a sled and shot ahead, the wind stinging my face while the roars of the course and my heavy breathing blended into a single drive to keep going. I ran as if I needed to save someone. I ran to prove I wasn't a waste of space. The course was dark, but I could see the light at the end. I reminded myself who I was. Izuku Midoriya, a healer on UA's hero course, and I crossed the finish line in first place. The crowd cheered. Tears pricked my eyes. Uraraka congratulated me and told me I had done an amazing job. I hid my face, unaccustomed to the attention, and suddenly realized everyone knew my quirk. I murmured that it was nothing. Then I remembered the injured students and decided to find Recovery Girl before the broadcast drew more attention. Recovery Girl was in her office, and some security guards had already gathered the injured so I could assist. Several students had burns, but there were no severe injuries. I treated them quickly, offering candy to help ease their discomfort. I always carried lollipops, chocolates, mints, gum, and gummy bears. They looked less down afterward and thanked me. I smiled and tried to lighten the mood by asking about their quirks and hobbies, and I even took notes for my records. I hoped they would reach their dreams. They seemed like a good group. When I returned to the stadium, the crowd was talking about the next challenge, and I was ready. Later, I cried tears of joy when I saw that we had made it to the finals. Uraraka jumped for joy, Tokoyami nodded in approval, and Mia was pleased to showcase her invention. I laughed quietly, remembering I would be needed for more healing soon. I considered congratulating Kaken but expected he would be too angry after placing second. I turned and saw Todoroki watching me with a serious look. He signaled for me to follow him with a small flick of his head. I still needed to heal people, but it was lunchtime and Recovery Girl could wait a little longer. Todoroki led me down the corridor we had used to enter the stadium. An awkward silence settled between us. He studied me as if I had done something wrong. I suggested we get some lunch, and he remained silent as he analyzed me. I felt suddenly self-conscious, as if I had to cover myself. Todoroki then asked whether I was All Might's love child. I stared at him in surprise. He then suggested it was more likely I was related to Recovery Girl. I explained that I did have a connection to Recovery Girl and that I helped out All Might, and I added that I already had a father. Todoroki looked at me more closely, then said he sensed an aura around me that had influenced his fire. Then Todoroki began to open up about his past, the conflict with his father, the pain his family had endured, and the burden he carried. His words revealed a deep wound, and I felt a sharp ache in my chest at the realization of how much he had suffered. I stepped closer and took his hand to offer comfort. I wanted him to know he would not become like his father. I focused on his tension and trauma, and for a moment a cool, gentle warmth flowed from my fingertips into him, like pouring water over something heated and helping it settle. I withdrew my hand and realized I had discovered a new aspect of my power. I made a mental note to write it down in my notebook, careful not to hurt Todoroki by accident. It's still a new power and I know better than to just mess with it. The taller boy in front of me stared without revealing anything, but I could tell he was a bit uncomfortable. Was he confused at what I was doing? I didn't really know myself. Izuku told Todoroki that he would be watching and urged him to give it his all. I gave him one last look before rushing off to the nurse's office. Todoroki was strong. I would need to work just as hard. I made it to the nurse's office in a flash and found a line of first years waiting. The line wasn't long and Recovery Girl seemed able to handle it. I pulled up a chair, started filling out paperwork, and answered worried calls from parents. After 20 minutes, I decided to go meet my friends, or at least Kakin. I hoped Todoroki had eaten something too. I wasn't really hungry, but I needed to store up energy. I remembered what Todoroki had told me and my appetite dwindled. How many people would I have to help? I had finished a bunch of forms, but paperwork still sat stacked on the desk. I bumped into someone in the hall and apologized, stumbling over my words. I looked up to see a familiar face, Hitoshi Shinso. The purple-haired boy looked down at me with a passive expression, the dark circles under his eyes making me worry whether he had been sleeping enough. Shinso asked if all of Class 1A was that strange. I thought he could have said it nicer, but Kakin did make them all angry sometimes. Maybe I should be Kakin's translator or lawyer on the side. I told Shinso that we were just really pumped and asked how he was doing, noting he seemed to be by himself as I glanced around for anyone with him. Shinso replied that he didn't need other people if he wanted to eat. I said that talking to someone could be nice and admitted that I probably wouldn't eat with the crowd and would likely get lost. Panic made me clumsy with socializing, and I blurted out an invitation for him to sit with me, tugging on his arm and growing redder with every stare. Shinso seemed taken aback, but I pulled him past the crowd. I led him outside to an empty tree near the infirmary where I sometimes sat on a low branch when I needed air. Shinso stood awkwardly beside me, his expression still passive. I realized I had never properly introduced myself, so I hurriedly gave my name and a brief bow. Shinso introduced himself as Hitoshi Shinso and complained that he had been dragged here and thought it was a waste of time. Shinso suddenly ordered me to be quiet, and when he spoke my body froze as if under a trance. I recognized it as his quirk and wondered at its strength. Shinso then asked why I had brought him to the infirmary. I explained that I wanted to make sure he was all right since we were classmates, and his tired eyes suggested he might be worn out from the field. I added that I wanted to see if I could help with sleep deprivation. The words came out strangely formal as if I were still affected by the trance, but I was blushing despite that. Shinso told me I was speaking too much and asked me to calm down, his voice momentarily raised. He admitted he already thought I was strange and asked why I would want to be friends with him, especially since my reaction to his quirk might make it seem villainous. I insisted it wouldn't be villainous. Shinso's ability was impressive and I gushed that I had to write about it, only to remember my journal might be back at the infirmary with Recovery Girl. Shinso covered his face, taken aback by my enthusiasm, and I panicked at the thought that I had embarrassed myself. I told him I had to go, offered help if he ever needed it, and slipped a candy from my pouch into his hand before rushing back toward the nurse's office because Recovery Girl would be waiting. I sprinted to the infirmary and found it mostly empty except for a student resting on a cot. That meant I could change in peace. I grabbed the hoodie Recovery Girl had brought in for me and noticed the soft fabric starting to tear. Maybe I should reinforce it sometime. Mia probably had stronger material, but Mom had made that hoodie. I slipped off my dirty jumper and utility belt, feeling a little weak. I should have eaten, but it was too late to worry about it now. I pulled the hoodie on over my black spandex, grabbed my utility belt, and dashed back toward the field. The stadium-like arena was filling up for one-on-one matches. The heroes would be able to show their skill sets. I needed to take notes. Time, I had remembered to bring my notebook. I pulled out my phone to send a quick text to Recovery Girl just in case she had been looking for me. She hadn't called or texted yet, which was a good sign. The crowd cheered again as a new competitor jumped into the ring. From the stands, I could see Uruaka, Ilda, and Kakin. I planned to encourage Kakin before his fight. Present Mike called everyone's attention to the match that would determine the top 3. He announced the first battlers and the rules. Step out of line and you're done. The first to fight was Shinso. He wore a devious, knowing smile as his opponent drifted toward the boundary. Shinso moved with milky white eyes, his body seeming detached from his own movements. His quirk was impressive and clever, and I couldn't understand why people overlooked its value. Shinso might think the world was against him. I knew better than most what it felt like to be bullied, and it made me want to cheer for him even more. The crowd fell silent as Shinso became the only one remaining in the ring. The other students clutched their hair, stunned at how easily they had been overcome. I could not stay quiet. I shouted encouragement for Shinso and felt my usual shyness melt away. Soon the rest of the audience joined in, cheering for the purple-haired boy and the impressive quirk they had just witnessed. Shinso, unused to the applause, smiled and stuffed his hands into his pockets before walking off the field. As he passed, he glanced in my direction. I pulled my hoodie up to hide my face and felt my cheeks warm when he smiled back. I walked toward the stands, thinking this might be just the first round but that things were already getting heated. Battle after battle, more students came in to be treated. Kaminari was one of the early ones. He was so out of it that he barely registered me healing him and then resting with Recovery Girl, who had apparently gone back to her office. I barely had time to take notes. A few of the professionals had gotten hurt as well, and I was alarmed at the amount of bruising on some of them. Apparently they had been sparring and arguing about who would win the tournament. Their recklessness made me shake my head. Becoming a hero did not mean throwing common sense out the window. No wonder Recovery Girl complained so much. I cheered for Ilda when his match started. Mina's gadgets were flashy and loud. She made a show of her inventions while Ilda struggled against a net that trapped him. I watched from behind the entrance wall, intending to sit with them for a while after this and reassure them. Kaken was there too. I hoped he would help. I pulled my cap down to hide my face and kept a careful eye on my classmates. They looked like they were having a good time, though Uraka's expression made me uneasy. She seemed troubled by something. When the match ended, I went out to help Ilda. I was nervous about people finding out about my quirk, but I reminded myself that Ilda and Uraka were my friends and would not call me a liar. I told myself it would be okay even if others didn't like me. Kaken would probably still be a friend, though he had been ignoring me lately. Ilda greeted me and asked for assistance in his usual calm voice. He sounded a little disappointed but not upset about losing. I dropped to my knees and pulled a pair of scissors from my utility belt. The scissors usually served to cut bandages, but they worked well enough on the red net that held him. I told him to hold still and carefully cut the net away, making sure not to scrape his skin. Once he was free, I checked him over for injuries. I asked if he felt pain anywhere. He reported no physical pain, gave his usual hand signal, and offered a thumbs up. I smiled. He seemed to be doing fine despite the loss. It wasn't entirely his fault. Mina's gadgets had given him a real disadvantage. I prepared to treat his cuts and asked if he could stand. He nodded and jumped up, energetic as ever. I led him to the small treatment area where I had left beds and chairs for minor injuries. Anything serious would go to the infirmary. We sat on a cushioned blue chair and I dug into my utility belt for napkins and disinfectant spray. I warned him that it might sting and then cleaned his scrapes. I had been feeling dizzy and tired, and I noted to myself that I should have eaten something first. After finishing the cleaning, I pulled out a box of bandages. They weren't ordinary bandages. They were hero-themed bandages I had bought because of the All Might design, plus a variety pack with fun patterns. Ilda's face lit up when he saw the bandages I put on his elbow and knees. He noticed the design and seemed pleasantly surprised. Izuku giggled and nodded. The patient seemed embarrassed but pleased. Izuku pulled out a lollipop and thanked Ida for being a good patient. He dismissed him after checking for any other injuries and thought he should sit with the others later to see what they would say about his quirk. After treating many patients with mostly minor injuries, Izuku massaged his temples as paperwork piled up. It was a relief that Shiro had not developed hypothermia. He felt dizzy but forced himself to keep going. He still needed to give Todoroki a checkup. Todoroki did not look physically hurt, but he seemed unstable. The phone rang again, probably Shiro's concerned parents. Izuku planned to give Shiro the phone later so his family could have some peace of mind. Reporters had been a constant nuisance, and Izuku preferred that only the students and the heroes he had treated so far knew about his quirk. Searching for Todoroki, Izuku slammed the paperwork onto his makeshift desk in frustration and fatigue. He reminded himself to check on All Might as well. He could not completely heal that injury but could at least help. As he stepped into the hallway, he heard a tense exchange between Endeavor and his son. Endeavor barked at his son that he had been refusing to use his right side and that he needed that power to surpass All Might. Todoroki shot back that he would win using only his mother's quirk and would not give his father the satisfaction of seeing him use anything of his. Izuku felt his headache spike and his frustration rise. He decided to step in. Izuku announced that he needed to perform a checkup. Both men turned, surprised that someone had overheard them. Endeavor demanded to know who Izuku was. Izuku explained that he was the nurse, that he needed to examine Todoroki and ask some questions, and that he was very busy and stressed. Endeavor dismissed him rudely and told him to leave them alone. Izuku could no longer contain himself. Dizzy and tense, his anger gave him momentum. He stepped forward with his cap shadowing his face, his green eyes sharp. He moved with a sudden burst of force and struck Endeavor, sending the veteran hero stumbling back and his cap flying off. Izuku asserted that, as the attending medical professional, medical protocol placed him in charge of his patients. He insisted that no one interfered with his patients, especially friends, and made it clear he would not tolerate anyone threatening them. Endeavor was stunned by the outburst. Todoroki could not believe how boldly the nurse had spoken to his father. Izuku, still shaky, pushed Endeavor back gently and took Todoroki's hand. He led Todoroki to his area, relieved to know Todoroki was not to blame, and helped him sit down while gathering his supplies. Izuku offered to try to heal Todoroki's scar if it carried too many painful memories. Todoroki's eyes widened at the thought, and he touched his right side as if remembering pain. He explained that the scar reminded him of his mother and of the pain tied to the quirk he and his father shared. Izuku paused, taken aback by the weight of that admission. Moved, Izuku placed his hands on Todoroki's shoulders as tears threatened. He told Todoroki that the quirk was his own and that his father was not the same person he was. If Todoroki truly resembled his father, he would not feel such pain and doubt. Izuku's voice wavered as he implored Todoroki to see himself as separate from that legacy. Todoroki, stunned, mirrored the gesture and squeezed back gently. They stayed like that for a long moment, silently sharing understanding. Izuku was the first to break the embrace, mindful that more patients would arrive soon. Todoroki reluctantly let him go, feeling an unfamiliar warmth and tightness in his chest. Izuku urged him to give his all in the future and promised to watch. He asked Todoroki to promise to be a hero and to come to him if he ever needed someone to listen or to help heal him, even joking that Todoroki could save him from the boredom of paperwork now and then. Todoroki surprised Izuku by smiling for the first time Izuku had seen, and he agreed. Izuku promised he would save Todoroki from paperwork and joined in the laughter as he helped Todoroki to his feet. They walked together toward the entrance where Izuku prepared to run and rescue the two opponents. Todoroki asked nonchalantly why Izuku was hiding his identity. Izuku realized then that, although his mask was on, his hood had been down and his hat had fallen. It was the same costume he had worn during training. He slapped a hand to his face in embarrassment and admitted that he had a phobia of showing his face, apologizing for keeping it secret. Todoroki was surprised, and then silently vowed to protect this earnest classmate. As a future hero, he felt he owed that much. The screams of the crowd rose again. Later, Izuku called Recovery Girl on his phone to ask permission to watch the final match. Recovery Girl smiled and agreed, telling him he deserved to watch and to return afterward if there was trouble. Izuku headed to the stands. He found a free seat next to Uraraka and thanked her quietly. Uraraka explained that Ilda had a family emergency and had to withdraw, and she recounted some of the tournament's notable moments. Izuku listened, proud of how far his classmates had come and a little sad about his own loss to Shinso. He settled in to watch for a few hours of peace before the class conversation turned to quirks again. When Bakugo and Todoroki stepped onto the platform, both wore fierce expressions. The match began with Todoroki launching ice, and Bakugo answered with explosions that shattered the frozen defenses. The crowd braced for a quick finish, but Izuku knew better. Both were holding back enough to keep the fight within rules while still testing each other. Todoroki kept his ice controlled and careful, and the exchange grew more intense as Bakugo pushed through the barriers with force. Bakugo seized a moment to grab Todoroki and slam him into the wall, demanding that Todoroki try harder and stop holding back. Todoroki hesitated, unwilling to use his right side fully. A familiar voice in the arena urged Todoroki to use his right side, and Todoroki flinched at the reminder of what he had been suppressing. Bakugo, sweat on his face, shouted that he would not be underestimated and that he wanted Todoroki to come at him with everything so there would be no doubt who was number one. He launched forward, kicking up a cloud of dust and driving straight at Todoroki. For a moment Todoroki lit his right side, then froze in indecision. Bakugo cracked through the ice and the opportunity slipped away. Izuku felt panic rush through him. He blamed his tired body, his splitting headache, the growl of his empty stomach, and the way Endeavor's words had echoed in the arena, but he needed to get to Todoroki and to Bakugo. He sprinted down to the platform as fast as he could, but he arrived to find the aftermath of Bakugo's blast. Dust and debris filled the air, Bakugo collapsed from exhaustion, and Todoroki lay unconscious against a wall of ice. Without thinking of the eyes on them, Izuku ripped open his supply of bandages and scrambled onto the platform. He intended first to stabilize Todoroki and then to scold both boys for taking things so far. He laid his hands on Todoroki's exposed arm and felt a dizzy wave of exhaustion, but forced himself to focus on healing. He assessed Todoroki's condition and prioritized stabilizing him and repairing the damage so he could regain consciousness. Izuku imagined warmth and steady energy flowing from him into Todoroki, easing swelling and knitting tissues back together, and he concentrated until he felt a cool current move through his hands into Todoroki. The flow of energy steadied him, but Izuku knew he still needed to help Bakugo as well. I was almost done healing Todoroki when Bakugo yanked me away, seething. Bakugo gripped Todoroki's collar and demanded that he get up, insisting it didn't count unless he went all out and taunting him to fight. I forced myself to stop him. Gathering every ounce of strength, I stumbled and latched onto Bakugo's back, my arms wrapped around his neck, pleading for him to stop. In his fury, Bakugo pulled me off and roughly threw me across the platform. A sharp jolt shot through my arm as it was jarred, and I cried out. I needed to calm him and protect Todoroki. Careful with my hurt arm, I rose on shaky legs that had gone numb. My vision blurred, and the blonde figure of Bakugo was all I could make out. I staggered forward, begging him to stop. I drew in a breath of courage and continued toward them, each step feeling unreal and heavy in equal measure. Soon I stood before my childhood friend, boyhood bully, reluctant savior, and someone who had become a hero in my eyes, his back to me, his expression stormy. He was poised on the verge of crossing a line that would change everything. I shouted that he should stop and tried to calm him, tugging at his jumper and urging him to remember he was strong without tearing someone apart. Bakugo, lost in rage and yelling at Todoroki, could not hear me. He threw me again, and pain flared as my shoulder was jarred. Something in Bakugo snapped him out of his trance when he finally looked at me. The look on his face hit me like the memory of the day I got my quirk. We stared at each other for a long, suspended moment. I tried to form words and tell him how I felt, but before I could, the crowd's attention shifted. Todoroki stepped forward and unleashed a controlled burst of flame that struck Bakugo, sending him flying back. Todoroki stood tall, fire-activated but focused, and he accused Bakugo of daring to touch Midoriya that way. He insisted that Midoriya had only helped and warned Bakugo not to harm him. Heat washed over me as though the arena had become an inferno, but pride warmed me more than fear. My body was already shutting down, my vision wavered. I managed a shaky thumbs up as Todoroki approached, feeling the world growing hazy as sleep took hold. A mist gathered around us, and I drifted off. Izuku opened his eyes lazily to find himself sitting in a chair outside the arena. He guessed that Ms. Midnight's quirk had put everyone to sleep and wondered where he was. The winners were being announced on the screen. Ms. Midnight held the mic as the crowd cheered. All Might, in hero form, presented medals to the three winners. Tokoyami in third, Todoroki in second, both moving with poise. Then it was Bakugo's turn. He had been restrained in heavy metal chains and looked furious, biting and growling as if desperate for a fight. He rejected the medal, declaring it worthless. Izuku scratched the back of his head with his uninjured arm, thinking that being with Bakugo so long explained his behavior. All Might struggled a bit but managed to lift the metal chain over Bakugo's head. Bakugo stubbornly kept it between his teeth and continued to growl. Izuku decided he needed to talk to Bakugo later about his public image. Ms. Midnight announced that there was one more item before the festival ended and invited All Might to take the stage. Izuku felt someone lift him and something placed on his head. Still weak and dizzy, he shut his eyes, bracing himself to run if necessary. All Might introduced Izuku Midoriya as the first-place finisher of the obstacle course and acknowledged him as the healer who had helped several students during and after the events that day. All Might called him a special recognition and praised him as if he were an angel. All Might placed a hat on Izuku to help hide his face a bit and carried him around as the crowd cheered. From the spot on All Might's shoulder, Izuku stiffened and smiled faintly, but then All Might realized the boy didn't seem to be breathing. Concerned, All Might rushed to get medics. He thought that Recovery Girl would not forgive him if he let the boy slip away. Izuku later sat at a desk, pulling at his hair as his vision blurred. He clutched an All Might plush Recovery Girl had given him for his desk. His classmates glanced his way with curiosity but did not press him with questions. Bakugo, still angry, bit at a metal ribbon and then stomped out of the room, some others following a few minutes later, all exhausted from the festival. Soon most students had left. Uraraka remained only until her parents called her, and then left. That left Todoroki and Izuku, who drifted in and out of consciousness, alone in the classroom with Aizawa. Izuku came fully back to awareness when his phone vibrated. It was a text from his mother saying she had seen him on TV and that he had done a good job and that she wanted him to come home soon. Realizing his mother was waiting for him, he pushed back his chair and prepared to go. Todoroki stood nearby and told Midoriya that he needed to think about many things: his quirk, his father, and his family, but that he believed Midoriya was right. Todoroki said he was not his father and thanked Midoriya, then looked down at him. His expression was no longer as cold as it had been a few hours earlier, as if using his flames had finally warmed part of his heart. Izuku smiled softly at the taller boy, understanding that he needed time. Todoroki waved and left, his steps measured and thoughtful. Feeling exhausted, Izuku leaned back in the seat and closed his eyes. The day had been emotionally and physically draining. His arm throbbed despite being bandaged and set, and even Recovery Girl would not have been able to fully heal him because he lacked the necessary stamina. He told himself he only needed a moment's rest and let sleep overtake him. Later, Izuku woke on his sofa at home, still tired and sore. He was unsure how he had gotten home, but he had no energy to worry about it. He walked into the kitchen, where his mother had prepared a meal for him. At that moment, Aizawa joked that he had found a new problem child and that Izuku would be his new source of entertainment. Izuku knew a lot about the world. It could be cruel and indifferent, feeding on people's sorrow regardless of age or circumstance. That knowledge rode with him on the train as he went to see Ilda's brother. His arm was still sore and in a sling. He had been sleep-deprived, trying to do paperwork while listening to and calming his mother's worried fidgeting. For the past 3 hours he had been hunched over forms in the dining car, his mother sitting across from him, watching him with concern. That morning his mother had woken him with frantic worry. It had taken 10 minutes of gentle coaxing for him to calm her and explain what had happened. He had overdone himself again. He spent the rest of the morning easing some of her fears. He watched her make breakfast and they talked about their neighbor's dog that behaved more like a cat. She had prepared pancakes and they had eaten together. He hugged her and helped wash dishes with his one good arm while they continued their gentle conversation about puppies. It had felt like a blissful morning until his mother turned on the news and a broadcast said that someone had been hurt and was in grave condition at a hospital. The rest blurred for Izuku. He promised his mother he would call during the train ride and he remembered the rush to gather everything after hearing about Ilda's brother. That was why he was on the train now, with bags for an overnight stay and his allowance tucked away. They had paid extra for a nicer carriage, but the trip still felt long and exhausting. As his stop approached he realized he had not even called Ilda to say he was coming. He pulled out his phone, reassuring himself that Ilda would not refuse. When the phone connected, Ilda's voice came through deeper and rougher than usual, laced with sadness as he asked if it was Midoriya. Izuku asked Ilda to come pick him and his mother up at the station. Ilda sounded surprised and hesitant, but Izuku urged him by saying his stop was coming and that he had heard about Ilda's brother and wanted to help. After a short pause, Ilda's tone softened into a hopeful promise that he would be there soon. Izuku smiled, turned off his phone, and let his good hand fall to his side. His mother asked if the voice on the phone had been his friend and when the friend would arrive. She fretted about not having anything special to bring as a get-well gift, worrying aloud that she should stop at a shop to add to the chocolates. Izuku reassured her that the chocolates were lovely and suggested they could stop at a flower shop. She asked if he should even be traveling in his condition, mentioning how weak he looked and how he had trouble controlling his quirk. The trip had aged her. Her features were more lined, and her tearful eyes showed desperation to keep her child from doing something reckless. Izuku's smile was tired but gentle. His skin looked pale and his eyes had dark circles beneath them. He felt like someone who should be resting rather than traveling to help someone in pain. Guilt twisted his stomach. He had to help Ilda, but he did not want to make his mother worry more. When they stepped off the train, Izuku felt as though he had just run a marathon. His mother hovered close and suggested they sit down or get him something to eat. Izuku, barely holding on to consciousness, said they should get to a waiting room. He stumbled forward and his mother fell into step beside him with worried eyes, repeating his name softly. He smiled, shaky, toward her and told her he was okay. She looked surprised and relieved, tears welling as she tried to steady herself. Her worry eased into a small, proud smile at how selfless he had become. He felt steadier until he bumped headfirst into someone on the platform. Embarrassed, he stepped back, apologies bubbling up, but the movement had been too sudden. Darkness and ringing filled his head and he could not think or move. He just wanted to sleep. Izuku woke with a pounding headache and a bright light that made it worse. His mother called out to him with a cry of relief and worry, and he felt terrible for making her so afraid. He pushed his arm slowly off his face and saw her eyes, wet and fearful. He told her he was okay. She scolded him for not taking better care of himself and then burst into tears, pulling him into a hug. Izuku, used to his mother's worry, rubbed her back with his uninjured arm and hid his face in her shoulder. He felt lucky to have parents who cared so much. He told his mother it was all right and that they could tell his father about their trip. He apologized for making her rush on the train and said he had come because of Ilda, mentioning his friend's brother. Tears brimmed in his own eyes as they held each other close. Soon the older Midoriya let go and rubbed her son's curly hair while wiping the last of the tears from her eyes, then gently wiped his tears. Both wore smiles. The happy moment ended when a doctor arrived with the class representative. Ida bowed deeply and apologized, his regret and near tears unmistakable as he expressed how sorry he was that Izuku and his mother had been troubled on his account and insisted they should not have to bear his family's burden. Izuku remained still, looking at his friend, reminding him that he was a friend and could rely on him. Izuku said that he did not have many friends and cherished Ida, so Ida should not say such things. Ida raised his head and offered a small smile. He briefly took in Izuku's pale skin, curly hair, and emerald eyes, noting how the tiny smile made him look almost angelic. Mrs. Midoriya interrupted Ida's thoughts warmly, introducing herself and presenting chocolates for Ida and his family, expressing relief that her son had such a kind friend and inviting Ida to visit sometime. Ida nodded in agreement, cheeks a little flushed. The doctor cleared his throat and explained that he was in a bit of a hurry. He outlined that Izuku would be fine but had low blood sugar, was underweight, dehydrated, fatigued, and recovering from a dislocated shoulder, so he needed at least 3 days of rest. He advised limited use of Izuku's quirk and prescribed vitamins and painkillers for the headache, then handed Mrs. Midoriya a slip of paper and asked her to follow him after he finished the paperwork. Mrs. Midoriya nodded, relieved that someone would watch over her son at the hospital. Mrs. Midoriya told the boys to be good and said she would be right back, then planted a kiss on Izuku's forehead before following the doctor out the door. A heavy silence fell between the two boys. Izuku attempted to shift on the bed to look more closely at Ida, but a spike of pain ran through his body and he hissed, longing for Kaken to be there. He blamed himself for not being able to come sooner and felt he deserved the pain. He wondered how his mother could be so gentle and how he had come this far. Ida asked if Izuku was all right and offered to call a nurse, his voice frantic as he searched for something to help his friend. Izuku took deep breaths and squeezed his eyes shut, trying to breathe through the discomfort. He then asked if Ida's brother was in the hospital, and when Ida confirmed that he was, Izuku begged to be taken to him. Ida was stunned and at a loss for words, torn between worry and the desire to help, but finally agreed despite a tug of guilt at his heart. Ida slid his hands under Izuku's lower thighs and back, lifting him with surprising ease and starting down the corridor. Izuku protested about his weight and walking, but Ida reassured him that he had been lighter than expected when brought to the hospital. Izuku blushed and tried to focus on the task at hand. The long white hallways narrowed as Ida hurried toward his brother's room. The sounds of heart monitors, quiet breathing, and the faint clicks of machines mixed with the soft footsteps and murmurs of medical staff. The air felt cooler and the lights dimmed as they approached the room. When they stopped in front of the door, Ida stiffened and held Izuku closer, feeling guilt, hurt, and worry gnaw at him. Midoriya, as if sensing the turmoil, rested a hand on his chest and offered calm encouragement, telling Ida that he was going to be okay, that Ida was a hero and strong like his brother, and that he could take a step forward. That reassurance gave Ida the courage he needed, and he stepped into the room. Izuku moved into the dim space of the room and took in the scene. Tubes and medical equipment were arranged around a single bed where a man lay with bandages on his head, arms, and legs. Despite the visible signs of injury, the man's face was serene. The sight made Ida breathe in sharply. His strong composure seemed to waver. Ida gently set Izuku down on a nearby plastic chair, his eyes wet. Izuku steadied himself and tried to remain strong for Ida. A flare of pain near his ribs and head reminded him of the earlier trauma. He bit his lip and focused on steadying his breath. The sterile, medicinal scent in the room made him feel faint for a moment, but he forced himself to calm down and tune his attention to helping Ida and the injured man. He focused on what he could do next. Izuku thought the injured person would pull through, but he wondered if he could really heal the legs and why his own felt so numb. With a shaky breath and trembling hand, he looked at Ilda, who seemed about to be sick. Izuku asked Ilda to look for masks and the clipboard on the desk to give him a better clue how to heal his brother. Ilda did as instructed, relieved to have something to focus on. Izuku rifled through the files. They were mostly the surgeon's notes, but they would have to do. He closed his eyes and pressed his unsteady hand against the older Ilda's collarbone, trying to reach as close to the heart and brain as possible. A cool rush of energy flowed down his arm and into the patient. The heart was weak and the brain had partial damage. Izuku focused on the hippocampus and parietal lobe, imagining each area repairing itself. Slowly, the essential regions for sensory processing and memory began to mend. The process was slow, and with every passing minute his body felt progressively weaker. He could only manage the work bit by bit. He had never healed anyone to this extent before. Even when he had helped Aizawa, the injuries had been localized and less critical. A new worry struck him. He had never repaired a brain on this scale. The brain's complexity and the surge of electrical activity made healing more difficult. Pushing glandular recovery too quickly could overwhelm the nervous system and risk leaving someone in a vegetative state, and Izuku was unwilling to gamble with that outcome. He carefully visualized the neurons, shaping the hemispheres and protective fatty tissues as precisely as he could. Gradually, enough of the brain was restored that the damage amounted to only swelling and some memory loss. How long had it taken? His entire right side felt numb, and focusing had become difficult. He realized he had been breathing heavily. He turned his attention to the lungs, picturing the branching airways and the tiny sacs that exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide. He reinforced their protective lining and willed cells to regenerate. The work moved even slower than before. It became harder and harder to maintain concentration, and each breath felt more labored. He had to stop. He could not give any more. Exhaustion and numbness overcame him. His thoughts blurred as someone called his name urgently. Ilda shouted his name, asking if he was all right. Izuku struggled to open his eyes and make out Ilda, wondering why there was shouting and why they were in a hospital. He tried to speak, but a burning sensation rose in his stomach and his heart hammered. Despite the rapid heartbeat, his body felt cold. An itch in his lungs soon turned into a coughing fit. He turned away from the patient as his vision blurred into gray shapes and wet coughs racked his body. Inside he felt like he was burning while his skin remained icy. His vision mottled, and he noticed his once clean clothes were stained. His hands and mouth felt sticky, accompanied by an unpleasant metallic taste. Confusion swirled. He could not place where he was or what was happening. He muttered to himself that he was so tired and thought he would take a quick rest. Someone nearby shouted for Midoriya, urgency in their voice. Izuku's eyes fluttered open to a white ceiling. His mother embraced him with familiar, strong arms. He recognized them even though his vision was still a little blurry. She sobbed, and guilt hit him in the stomach. Everything was hazy. He tried to remember why he was in a hospital and why his mother was so worried. A doctor entered the room, clipboard in hand, and told them that Izuku would be fine but needed rest and should not use his quirk for at least a week. His mother sat back in a plastic hospital chair, wiping away tears of relief and anxiety. The doctor assured them Izuku should rest, take prescribed medication and vitamins, eat 3 balanced meals, drink water, and aim for 8 hours of sleep or at least 6 if 8 was impossible. The doctor also acknowledged Izuku's remarkable healing quirk, advising caution about overexertion and suggesting he set boundaries about whom to heal. Scratches and bruises often healed on their own, and being too eager to help could cause problems. He mentioned that the hospital would be happy to have Izuku assist as an intern or aide if he was interested. The doctor then excused himself and said he would return soon with Izuku's friend so they could go home. Why would I have to worry? Ilda, I had almost forgotten about his brother. The thought made my stomach twist and my head throb. Forcing myself upright, I pushed up with aching limbs and my unsteady arm. My mother came to my aid as I struggled. His mother explained that his friend was with his brother and that he had felt so bad carrying him with all the blood. He had looked pale and scared. Izuku told his mother that it was not her fault and apologized for acting recklessly. Insisted he could not leave his friends alone and promised he would try to be more careful. His mother, eyes wet, begged him to be careful and then brightened as she added that his father had called and would be home soon. She said they had planned a surprise visit but had been worried after Izuku's quirk manifested. The narrator forgot the guilt for a moment and lit up at the news that their father would be home for summer. Memories of family outings and lazy days on the couch filled the narrator with a childish excitement that made the mother smile. The moment broke when a classmate entered the room looking shaken, his face streaked with tears. The narrator pleaded silently with his mother, and she nodded before standing to use the restroom, whispering a last caution and planting a kiss on the narrator's head as she passed through the doorway. Ilda let her go, awkward and unsure how to respond to the sympathy in the room. The narrator motioned for him to sit down. Ilda hesitated, jaw clenched, eyes flicking back to the closed bathroom door. Once the soft sound of footsteps faded down the hallway, the narrator asked him to sit, stammering and embarrassed about sounding weak but trying to steady himself. Ilda sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor with an empty look. When asked about his brother, Ilda's shoulders tensed and he squeezed his eyes shut. He told the narrator, in broken sentences and between sobs, that his brother could no longer run and that he would not be able to walk again. The confession stopped the narrator's breath. Overcome with grief, the narrator clung to Ilda and apologized between sobs, burying his head on Ilda's shaking shoulder as they both cried. After a while, the narrator let Ilda grieve alone. Later that day, Izuku woke to find Ilda asleep in his arms, both of them with salt-streaked cheeks and swollen red eyes from crying. Ilda's head rested on Izuku's chest and his glasses had slipped down onto Izuku's collarbone. A blanket covered them both. Izuku rubbed his eyes carefully to avoid jostling Ilda and smiled weakly when he saw their mother on the phone, relief evident on her face. Their mother, Inko, looked up and then set the phone down with a small laugh of relief when she saw them awake. She moved around the room, fussing gently and asking if either of them needed anything while she searched through her bag. Ilda sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes and feeling for his glasses. The day's events hit him all at once. He sprang from the bed, flushed and disheveled, voice thick and breathy as he tried to apologize between coughing fits, his head feeling heavy and disconnected. The narrator watched him, tired and tender, understanding the weight of what had happened and the long road ahead for Ilda's brother and for them all. He was pulled into the comforting arms of Inko Midoriya, who held him as she would her own son and let him calm down while reminding him that he was all right. Inko helped the boy compose himself, tidied his appearance as best she could, and handed him a cold water bottle, which he gratefully accepted and used to soothe his swollen eyes. Inko gave him her phone and asked him to call his mother so she could come pick him up. Ilda took the phone without thought, dialed his mother, and after a short conversation he thanked Inko and accepted the juice she offered, then sat in the plastic hospital chair beside her. Inko praised him gently, telling him he was a very strong boy and that she was glad he was Izuku's friend. Ilda responded awkwardly, insisting he did not deserve such praise and blaming himself for putting Izuku in danger. He rubbed his eyes and rested the cool water bottle on them as Izuku slept again. Inko explained that after talking with her husband she had agreed he could be Izuku's friend. Her husband had been upset about Izuku being put in danger, but he trusted that Ilda would protect their child. Inko urged Ilda to watch over Izuku at school, reminding him that they now understood how Izuku's quirk affected his body and that Izuku was already fragile. She pleaded with Ilda to promise that Izuku would never be lonely or left to suffer again. Ilda met her gaze with confusion at first, then with a quiet resolve, and he promised to help Midoriya however he could, both as a hero and as a friend. Inko smiled and nodded. Soon the door opened to reveal the worried mother of the blue-haired boy. She hurried in, scolding Ilda for being out so late and fretting about having another son in the hospital. She checked him over, chastised him briefly, and then fell silent when she saw the other women and the sleeping child. She cleared her throat, composed herself, and apologized to Inko for the commotion, bowing in thanks. Inko returned the bow and introduced herself as Izuku's mother. The blue-haired woman looked between her own son, who was disheveled but awake, and the pale, sleeping boy, and then asked for clarification. Inko explained that Midoriya had used his healing quirk to help Tensei recover from serious injury and that, because of him, Tensei would not suffer severe brain damage. Midoriya had become exhausted from overusing his quirk. The blue-haired mother reacted in stunned relief and gratitude. After the explanations and apologies, the two women continued talking while carrying the Greenette's luggage. Ilda, carrying the sleeping boy on his back, walked with them back toward his household. 2 hours later he woke groggy, tired, and with a pounding head. He staggered out of the soft bed and went looking for a bathroom, his legs heavy as he rubbed his eyes. In a hallway he nearly bumped into a tall, slender man who spoke in a deep, quiet voice and indicated the way to the bathroom and to a fresh set of clothes. Ilda used the bathroom, emptied his bladder, and found an all-might toothbrush with toothpaste on the counter. The sharp taste of mint helped him rouse himself as he brushed, scratched his curly hair, and splashed cool water on his face to relieve the sting of his swollen eyes. When he looked in the mirror, he realized he looked as disheveled as he felt. Anxiety clawed at him as he stepped out of the bathroom, clutching the toothbrush to his chest and moving cautiously down the hallway like an animal on edge. Thousands of questions swirled in his fuzzy head. He kept to a low, wary posture and scanned every inch of the corridor until he caught sight of a familiar figure. He recognized his mother and sprinted to her, throwing his arms around her small frame and calling out to her in relief. Exclaimed with relief and hugged the shaking boy, telling him he was awake. Izuku called for his mother, saying he did not know where they were and asking if she was all right, and began to say he had been so worried and could protect them, but his words trailed off. His breath quickened. If she was not panicking, it was probably all right. He told himself they were not going to die. He promised that if anyone tried to hurt her, he would make sure they could not. At least Kaken would protect them. He took deep breaths. He did not have his utility belt, and although he was strong there would clearly be more people. His mother reassured him that they were at his friend's house. He snapped out of his trance and realized he was at Ilda's house. He had come to help Ilda and his brother but felt he had failed. It had been too much. The thumping in his head worsened as he clutched his mother closer to ground himself. He blamed himself and thought he should have trained harder. He could not find the words. He felt he had failed. His mother soothed him, telling him he had done his best. He tried to stop shaking. Taking a deep breath, he reminded himself that he was in no position to be sad because Ilda was going through much more. He forced a smile. Ilda deserved a supportive friend who could help him smile. He turned to see a woman who must be Ilda's mother. He stood straight and tried to show as much strength as he could. He apologized for not being able to help her eldest son more and asked if she would entrust him to help her youngest son, his friend Ilda. The woman laughed softly and thanked him for being Tenya's friend, saying she hoped he could help Tenya succeed as he grew and that Tenya would help him as well. He did not have to look up to see she was smiling. That started a good day as they all headed to breakfast. Izuku smiled nervously and twiddled his fingers. Half the day had already passed since he had woken, and his mother had ordered him to take it easy. Ilda's mother had asked her son to watch over Izuku carefully since he still seemed a bit under the weather and jumpy. That left the two teenagers sitting in the class representative's bedroom while their mothers took a small day trip around town. Midoriya trailed off, unsure what to do with himself as he tried not to mess up the bed. The room was neatly organized with a twin bed, bookshelf, and a desk holding a laptop and writing utensils. Ilda sat stiffly in a swivel chair, just as nervous as Izuku. The room was not completely generic. It had a private bathroom, an extra closet for hero course items, and a flat-screen television accompanied by 3 blue bean bags. Izuku looked at the plain white walls, posterless and pictureless, which complemented the blue sheets and carpet. He felt a pang in his chest, another painful reminder of the fall of the blue-haired boy's idol. He realized he had not officially hung out with someone since he was 5. Even training with his childhood friend had mostly been workouts and then being dropped off at home. Ilda, not thinking friends were such a big deal, had mainly played with the children of his father's business partners and had gone along with their suggestions to be a good host. Izuku worried he had nothing to entertain Ilda with until Ilda asked if he liked video games. Ilda went to his closet and brought out a box containing wires and a video game console, explaining that his father's business partner had gifted it to him for his birthday. He had played games before with his older brother and at other people's homes and thought it would be a decent pastime. Izuku admitted that his dad had bought him a gaming console a couple of years ago and that he used to play with his mom a lot. He blushed, feeling a little sheepish. Ilda relaxed and quickly set up the console while Izuku shakily took a beanbag. When the console was ready, Izuku sat with 2 controllers in hand and asked what game they would play. He chose a racing game, and after some fumbling they launched it. The screen burst with color and a thrilling soundtrack played. Both boys read the tutorial carefully, picked avatars, and planned their strategies. Excitement built between them. At first they both struggled with the controls, but after the first race Izuku won, being more accustomed to gaming. Ilda demanded a rematch. 1 hour later, Ilda was on the edge of his seat, pressing buttons rhythmically, while Izuku curled inward and pushed buttons forcefully, the controller trembling in his hands. They had switched to a battle-based game and were absorbed, changing avatars and testing strategies. Izuku declared he would not let Ilda win this time. Any tension he had felt earlier had vanished. Both boys were down to their last health bars when a knock on the door startled Izuku, giving Ilda the opening he needed to land a final blow and win the game. Ilda would have been happier about his victory if Izuku had not been so frightened. He jumped up to help the shorter boy. The door opened to reveal the butler Izuku had met earlier. The butler bowed respectfully and apologized for intruding, saying it was time for lunch and for Master Midoriya's medication, which was light and should help him regain his strength. Izuku smiled shyly and said he was not very hungry. Ilda nodded and dismissed the butler. Ilda reached out to Izuku, who shakily took his hand and slowly stood. Izuku, mindful of his injuries and supported by Ilda, managed to hobble toward the dining room. His jaw dropped as he took in the mansion. How many rooms could one person possibly need, he wondered. The long carpeted halls made soft noises under their slippers. Between stretches of wall-hung paintings, sculptures, and family portraits. One portrait showed a small Ilda, no older than 5, in his older brother's arms. Both were laughing, their cheeks rosy and smiles almost identical, which made Izuku smile as well. They soon reached the dining room, which was magnificent. The table looked as if it could seat 30 people, surrounded by white cushioned chairs trimmed in polished wood. A cream-colored tablecloth embroidered with golden flowers and swirls covered the glassy wood. Flowers, fine china, candles, and bowls of fruit were arranged down the center, giving the table a harvest-like elegance. Izuku felt as though he had stepped into a castle. Ilda guided him to a seat near the end of the table. Izuku murmured that the room looked like something out of a storybook. Ilda pushed up his glasses, made small chopping gestures with his hands, and explained that his father often held business dinners there and that although his father's partners had similar settings, his mother and the butler had the sharper eye for this kind of decor. Izuku complimented Ilda's mother on her taste. Ilda said that his mother was the one who had taught him structure and helped him set up organization systems when he was younger, and that she was affectionate and an excellent baker who had picked up Western cooking during trips to America with his father. Ilda added that she had been teaching him, and that while he could cook when needed, his results were not yet as good as hers. Izuku said that he had not really experienced baking. He had helped with grilling and hot pot, which was common knowledge, and that he could perform tasks taught in economics perfectly but had not had many chances to use those skills at home. The Ildas did not need to cook for themselves, as servants maintained the household, but Izuku found the sight of the large, very organized kitchen endearing. 2 maids entered quietly, each carrying a platter. The food was presented beautifully: seasoned grilled chicken BRST cut into strips and topped with basil, a side of lightly yellow seasoned rice with a dusting of fresh pepper, and a small bowl of boiled vegetables. Izuku received a smaller portion, but the savory aroma made his mouth water. The maids bowed, set the plates down, and moved on to their other duties. The utensils were elegant ebony chopsticks engraved with white flowers on the larger end. Ilda placed his hands together in a brief prayer while Izuku tried to process how such a simple meal looked and smelled like it had come from a 5-star restaurant. He began to mutter, analyzing the protein content and seasonings of the meal in a low voice, then stopped when he noticed Ilda looking at him. He blushed. Ilda looked concerned and asked if the food was not to his liking, whether Izuku had any dietary restrictions, and offered to request another meal if needed. Izuku quickly shook his head and waved his hands to refuse. He bowed his head for a brief prayer and then picked up his chopsticks to taste the chicken. He brightened at the first bite. The chicken was firm but tender, the saltiness balanced by a smoky note. The rice had the right amount of pepper and moisture to complement the chicken, and the vegetables provided a sweet, refreshing contrast. Izuku closed his eyes for a moment as he savored the flavors and slowly finished his meal, enjoying each bite. Ilda smiled as he ate, though he did not enjoy the meal quite as much as Izuku did. He was surprised by how slowly Izuku ate, since Izuku had not had much to eat since arriving. Concerned that his guest might still be feeling weak, Ilda resolved to keep a close eye on him in class that week. Izuku then asked, quietly and a little timidly, if Ilda could show him around, explaining that he was starting to feel claustrophobic in the mansion and wanted some fresh air. Ilda agreed that a walk after a meal was a good way to aid digestion, offered to show him the garden, and added that he would also like to see his brother before they had to return to school the next day. Ilda said that he would like a friend with him while he spoke. He looked at Izuku with a stiff manner, his glasses tilted so Izuku could not see his eyes. Izuku relaxed into a big smile, nervous but relieved, sensing that Ilda was just as anxious. Izuku offered enthusiastically that he would love to come and could take some great notes for his journal. They began chatting happily about school as they finished their meal. Izuku mentioned that he mostly liked late-night movies and films about heroes, and that he avoided sad stories. Ilda replied that he preferred documentaries of real events and that he usually chose studying or training over watching movies. He added that he also had errands to run for his father and that he used to help his brother when he had spare time, though things felt different now. Ilda stared at his empty plate with visible pain. The thought that his brother would be waiting for visitors weighed on him. Izuku let Ilda grieve quietly, knowing there was nothing to say that would change the situation. Izuku's attention shifted to a small plate in front of him with 3 tablets and a glass of water. A handwritten note from his mother explained that the pills were supplements and medicine and reminded him to eat before taking them and to text her afterward. Izuku followed the instructions, grimaced at their size, took a deep breath, and swallowed the pills with the water. The plastic aftertaste made him pull a sour face and stick out his tongue as if that might help. Ilda noticed Izuku's expression and asked with concern if he was all right. Izuku admitted that the medicine tasted bad. Ilda laughed. a deep sound that eased his stiff posture and caused his glasses to tremble slightly with his quick breaths. Izuku began to giggle as well, and the moment of levity did not last long. The faint sound of aggressive drumming on a phone grabbed both boys' attention. A maid entered holding a vibrating phone with a superhero phone case. Izuku immediately brightened, recognizing the ringtone he had set for a specific contact. The maid bowed and handed him the phone. Izuku's eyes widened when he saw how many missed calls he had. He had only been gone a day. He hesitated, then answered. An enraged Bakugo shouted over the line, demanding to know where Izuku was and berating him for not answering earlier. Izuku nearly dropped the phone as the tone startled everyone in the room. Izuku called him back by the nickname Kaken and tried to calm him, asking him to breathe. Bakugo pressed, asking where Izuku and his aunt were. Izuku said that he was at Ilda's house, that they had come the day before, and that he would be coming home that night. There was a tense pause as Bakugo absorbed the information. Bakugo then angrily asked why Izuku was at that person's house and complained that Izuku could have at least sent a text. He demanded to know whether that person was better than him. The confrontation made Izuku feel sick, and Ilda watched him with growing concern. Not wanting to draw more worried stares, Izuku offered a strained smile and excused himself, moving to a secluded corner of the kitchen. Ilda observed him closely and noted that although Izuku looked better after some rest and food, he was still pale and weak. When Izuku smiled, however, his face looked genuinely relaxed, and his posture had become more fluid, evidence of a close bond with his friend. In the corner, Izuku asked Bakugo quietly whether he had seen the news that morning. Bakugo said no and shouted that he needed to train so he could beat Todoroki, using harsh words out of frustration. Izuku's stomach tightened. He touched his arm, which had mostly healed but would need another week before it could be used normally. A painful bruise lingered on his shoulder. He spoke up gently, telling Bakugo that what he had done at the festival had been reckless and that he did not need to prove anything. He reassured Bakugo that he was going back now and would see him at school tomorrow, apologizing for worrying him, and then ended the call. Izuku reflected on the sports festival and how much pressure Bakugo had been under. He understood that Bakugo had always been pushed to be exceptional and that the rescue at the festival had changed something in him. He had become kinder in some ways, yet that only added to the pressure he felt. Izuku sighed, massaging his temples, and muttered that just because Todoroki had not used his power did not mean he was failing, calling Bakugo a fool in private. He walked back to the table and found Ilda standing at the end of the now cleared table. Ilda apologized for the interruption. Izuku explained that he was not used to so many messages and had not expected someone to be so worried about him, and he felt embarrassed about how he had treated Ilda. Ilda replied that it was quite all right and asked whether Bakugo usually knew how he acted, admitting that it still surprised her that Izuku was so close to someone so unlike him and hoping she had not sounded rude. Izuku fidgeted with his fingers, unsure how to answer. He said he had known Kaken for over 10 years and that they had been close when they were small. For a while they had drifted apart, but they had grown close again after he had been in an accident. He hoped that explanation would satisfy Ilda. He did not feel he could tell the whole truth to anyone. Ilda accepted the answer, and then reminded him that they should go to the hospital before visiting hours ended and to make sure to text his mother. She asked a maid to fetch some things for the visit. Izuku shifted his weight from one foot to the other, holding a small box of herbs he had bought with the rest of his allowance. Ilda had bought flowers. She had protested letting Izuku buy a gift, since it was for her brother, but Izuku had insisted. He stood with his gift in hand while Ilda prepared, then checked his phone and sent a brief message to his father explaining what had happened that day. Their mothers had returned home and Midoriya's mother had said they would go home as soon as he came back. From the tone of the texts, Izuku could tell Ilda's mother was having a hard time as well. He turned off his phone just as Ilda opened the door and silently motioned for him to come in. Izuku walked into the hospital room. The machines and wires were less invasive now, and the windows were open to let fresh air in. On the bed lay Ilda's older brother, wrapped in bandages but in better condition than before. His face was still pale and he rested quietly, with bandages around his midsection and a strip across his forehead that revealed some short navy hair. The heart monitor and 4-drip marked a steady rhythm. Izuku stood awkwardly at the edge of the bed and felt as if he were meeting a hero again. He wondered if he should learn how to talk to people properly. The older brother smiled gently at the shy green-haired boy, and Izuku remembered the stories of how serious his friend could be and how surprised he had been to hear Ilda call someone a friend. Izuku offered the small box he had kept intact. The older brother accepted with a weak smile. The simple blue wrapping came away to reveal a metallic tin with a small handwritten note inside. The note explained that the herbs were meant to help with pain, aches, and circulation, and that Izuku had left a recipe for a calming tea with the butler. Izuku had thanked him for everything he had done and everything he would do, and had written that Ilda had praised him highly and always saw him as a hero and an idol. Izuku had added that he considered the older brother a hero as well, whether patrolling or guiding them, and offered to help however he could. The older brother looked up at Izuku and, with a new spark in his eyes, thanked him. Izuku smiled more broadly, and the friends nearby could not help but grin as well. The two younger boys did not fully understand how grateful the older brother truly was, but the mood in the room lightened. Later that day, Ilda carried Izuku's backpack on his back with ease and held the handle of Midoriya's wheeled luggage in his other hand as they walked. Izuku carried a shopping bag of souvenirs his mother had bought and had tried to help earlier, only to be gently stopped by a maid and Ilda. He sighed as he saw his mother talking with Ilda's parents. His mother chatted softly while a tall, well-built man with dark, softened eyes and black and gray hair stood with an arm around her. Ilda greeted his father with a tilted smile. Ilda's father told Tenya that he had seen him at the sports festival and how proud he had been to call his boy a finalist. The teen tensed, unsure how to respond, and Ilda's mother stepped forward and laid a comforting hand on his shoulder. She told him it would be okay, that if the older brother was anything he was resourceful and would not stay down for long. She added that she and his father would be staying near home for a while and thought it best for him to take another day or two off. Ilda's father looked at his son with eyes that showed he had cried earlier, offering quiet support. Ilda paused for a moment and stared at his father and then his mother, his brows furrowing with indecision. Izuku's mother told Ilda to stay home, that she had his email so she could send homework and to call if he needed help. She and Uraraka would do their best. Izuku offered a quiet, reassuring smile. Ilda returned the look toward Izuku's warm green eyes and thanked Mrs. Midoriya. Ilda's father slipped an arm around his son's shoulders and smiled, relieved that his family was all right. After a brief conversation with the Ildas, the five of them walked to the train station together. Ilda carried most of the luggage, refusing to let Izuku take anything too heavy. Izuku pouted at being kept from helping more, but he was glad to have been of some service and made a small promise to himself to visit again. 3 hours later, Izuku stumbled onto the couch and fell face first, still careful of his injuries. His mother sank down beside him, both of them physically and mentally exhausted, and they let out a tired groan. They shifted so Izuku, still on his stomach, could see the television while his mother sat upright beside him, maintaining her usual composed posture. Mrs. Midoriya grabbed the remote and turned the television to one of her favorite dramas that Izuku sometimes watched with her. Neither wanted to cook, so they decided to order from a local restaurant. They settled closer together on the couch, listening to the soft voices and occasional shouting from the drama. Izuku felt himself drifting off as his eyelids grew heavy. His thoughts blurred into memories of Ilda, of heroes, of food, and of Bakugo. He had texted Bakugo after boarding the train and had not received a reply. He closed his eyes and muttered that he wished Bakugo would let himself breathe. Later, Izuku's pen scratched across paper as he tried to get some work done. He had arrived at school early to avoid crowds, only to receive a gentle scolding from Recovery Girl, who had brewed tea for him. Recovery Girl had been updated by his mother and warned him not to overexert himself for the next week. Recovery Girl peered at him with concern and told him to come to the infirmary if he felt unwell, reminding him that she expected to see him before lunch to give his medicine. Izuku looked down at the hot, sweetened tea by his paper and admitted that he was fine. He smiled and mentioned that he needed to restock his candy supply soon. He had run out of lollipops and was low on chocolates but still had some toffees and gumdrops. He knew a few teachers already knew where he kept his small stash. The bell rang and Izuku gave a small, reassuring wave before hurrying to homeroom. He moved through the quiet halls of UA as best he could, tired and still a bit weak from his injury. The long corridors felt louder than they should, but he closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and steadied his tense muscles before clutching the strap of his backpack and continuing. He reached his classroom and gently opened the door, hoping not to interrupt. All eyes turned to him and the teacher paused mid-sentence. Izuku felt momentarily like a puppy among wolves, trembling with anxiousness. Aizawa called on him to take a seat and acknowledged that he had been at the infirmary. The teacher returned to the board and explained, in his dry tone, that the derivative of sine is cosine and the derivative of cosine is negative sine, insisting that the students memorize these derivatives to pass the year. Izuku silently thanked Aizawa and hurried to his seat. As soon as he sat down, he focused on his work, ignoring the curious looks. He steadied his breathing and wrote down the steps to solve the equations. The class PRD ended quickly and they had a short break before history. Izuku laid his head on the desk and felt glances at his back, including the burning stare from Bakugo, who sat in front of him and glared in his direction. Izuku took small, calming breaths and smiled to reassure himself and those around him. He reminded himself that Ilda would be proud of how he was handling things. He had come first in the UA Sports Festival obstacle course and he could do this. Izuku kept repeating the same thought in his head. He was so absorbed that he did not notice the person sitting in front of him. The rest of the class knew the two were close in a way, or at least something made Bakugo act kinder toward Midoriya than toward the others, though Bakugo's personality was still rough. Bakugo started to speak but then fell silent. Izuku continued to shake a little, the nervousness that had been with him since middle school. Bakugo remembered that Izuku had always been anxious, though he also had an optimistic streak beneath it. Bakugo returned his attention to the lesson but kept watching Izuku from time to time. Neither of them said anything, and Izuku felt some comfort in the silence. The history lesson passed, and Izuku wrote notes with his head resting on the desk, fighting sleep. After the long PRD, the students were given a 10-minute break before English. Izuku thought he could sleep through the next class, any grammar his father would correct later when they FaceTimed. His father was coming home in 5 days and had said he would stay at home, which made the Midoriya family overjoyed. Izuku smiled softly at the thought of more time with his father, though it had been hard to see him recently. Bakugo had not seen his own father since he was 6, and Izuku had only briefly bumped into Mr. Bakugo once at a middle school festival, exchanging only a polite hello. Middle school felt just a few months past but somehow longer. Izuku had made friends. Labeling Bakugo was harder. A friend, perhaps Uraraka, Hida, Bakugo and hopefully Shinso considered him their friend. The rest of the class now knew about his quirk, which All Might had showcased on national television. He wanted his All Might plushie, which he had left in All Might's office along with Recovery Girl who had his medicine. He would have to go there at lunch. He usually ate with Recovery Girl while helping with paperwork and chatting, though sometimes he sat with Ida and Uraraka. He had enjoyed their small talk. He and Bakugo mainly walked to and from school together, with short conversations throughout the day. Being with Katsuki was not so bad. Bakugo was determined to be number one. Izuku sensed that Bakugo isolated himself from everyone but him, and he noticed how Bakugo watched him for long stretches when no one was looking, the fear beneath the anger. Izuku understood Bakugo's goals and what he was running from. He had seen that in the older boy's behavior. Bakugo nudged him awake in the infirmary. Izuku startled and blinked blearily. He mumbled in confusion. Bakugo informed him that it was lunch break and that the nurse had said he needed to eat. Izuku looked around. He held his All Might plushie and had a wet towel on his forehead. The blanket covered his thin frame and the curtains around the bed were drawn. Izuku wondered when Bakugo had arrived. He clutched the plush closer and pushed himself up, letting the wet towel fall onto his lap. He knew he probably should have stayed home, but this was his dream school and he did not want to miss days. If he wanted to help people, he had to push himself. His gaze swept their small space and settled on Bakugo, who sat on a chair beside the bed with a tray of lunch. Bakugo had taken off his blazer, revealing his muscular build in contrast to Izuku's lean frame. Bakugo asked whether Izuku planned to throw up and glared without any real malice. Izuku laughed softly and shook his head, embarrassed at being caught staring. His face flushed and he wished he could disappear. He could not see the clock by the infirmary door and wondered how long he had slept and how long Bakugo had been there. He worried whether Bakugo had eaten yet and thought about his calorie needs and routines. He watched Bakugo reach into a bag for tissues and set the tray beside the bed. Izuku held the chopsticks and stared at the food, his expression pained. Bakugo watched him eat and felt a sharp, sudden ache that was almost like being punched in the stomach. The feeling had been with him ever since he had watched Izuku jump, a possessive, aching certainty that Izuku belonged with him. Seeing Izuku in pain felt like torture for Bakugo. Both of them did not have their blazers on. Izuku's blazer lay neatly folded at his side, placed there by Recovery Girl. Unlike Bakugo, Izuku looked thin and fragile, bone and muscle barely holding him up against the sheets. Bakugo wanted to punch the walls of the infirmary, to shout at Izuku to get better, to demand he stop being hurt. He wanted to scream and to cry, to protect Izuku and flee from the guilt of knowing he had been a terrible person because Izuku believed in him, because Izuku never gave up, because Izuku was supposed to be the one he protected. Bakugo kept replaying the contradictions. This was the person who had defeated him twice, the person who hated being hurt but was now the one lying in a bed. This was the person he could not imagine leaving him. The glare on Bakugo's face showed the anger he might have used as force. Instead it turned into worry and a feeling he refused to name. He focused on Izuku and decided he would keep him safe and happy. He would become the #1 hero with Izuku by his side, under his protection. Bakugo watched Izuku pick at the rice in front of him and grow increasingly impatient. Bakugo told Izuku firmly that he had to eat, sliding the tray closer and insisting that Izuku finish at least half if he wanted to return to class. Bakugo added that Recovery Girl said Izuku needed to take some medication. Izuku shook his head and whispered that he was not hungry, curling inward. Bakugo urged him again and then offered a bargain, asking if Izuku would eat half if Bakugo ate half as well. Izuku tensed and looked up at Bakugo with wide green eyes. Bakugo reminded Izuku that he needed to eat and refused to leave until at least half the food was gone. When Izuku refused, Bakugo took the chopsticks from Izuku's loose grip and, moving quickly to the bedside, fed him mouthfuls of rice. Izuku gasped the nickname, Kaken, and Bakugo continued, feeding him until Izuku turned his head away. Izuku knew he should eat more. He knew he needed to recover, but he simply was not hungry. He felt pathetic for not being able to finish even half. Izuku turned his face away, unwilling to meet Bakugo's eyes or accept the clumsy kindness. He told Bakugo quietly that he did not think he could eat any more. Bakugo watched him with 1,000 thoughts but no change on his face. He picked up the light soup from the tray and told Izuku it was safe to drink, explaining that the person who prepared the meal had made it especially light for him. Izuku breathed in and decided to try. He asked Bakugo if he would walk him home later, preparing himself. Bakugo agreed gruffly, but Izuku suddenly pulled the soup from Bakugo's outstretched hand and began to drink it too fast. The hot liquid made him wince and his eyes watered. A tear slipped down his freckled cheek. Bakugo reacted immediately, snatching the bowl away and scolding him, alarmed by how the soup had burned his mouth. Izuku tried to speak around the discomfort, asking where the freezer was. Bakugo moved quickly across the room to Izuku's desk, opened the small fridge tucked underneath, and grabbed a bag of ice without hesitation. Bakugo returned to Izuku in a rush, placing the ice on Izuku's lap to cool his mouth. He steadied Izuku with both hands, holding him gently but firmly so Izuku would not jerk away while the chill eased the sting. The tray and the spilled food were forgotten on the floor. Bakugo called Izuku's name again and again, breathing hard with worry, his grip tense from fear and guilt. The place where Bakugo's hands rested began to sting from the cold, but Izuku said nothing about it. He watched Bakugo, the desperation, the fear, the weight of guilt, and it made Izuku want to cry. Izuku spoke Bakugo's nickname once more, his voice firmer than before, trying to reach the other boy. He took a steadying breath and knew that right now Bakugo needed him. Izuku needed to be the calm that would help Bakugo breathe. Izuku called out to Katsuki, his voice sharper than usual. The shout snapped Bakugo out of his trance, and he finally noticed the smaller teen beneath him. He immediately let go and jumped back as if he had been burned. Bakugo froze and stared at Izuku, taking in the bruises on the softer skin of the boy he had known since childhood, the one he had once promised to protect. Neither of them spoke. They only looked at one another until Recovery Girl slid the infirmary door open and asked if Midoriya was still there and whether Bakugo should have taken him to class before the halls filled. Bakugo answered that they were about to leave, but his voice was distant and flat. Izuku put an ice cube in his mouth, rose slowly, and gathered both of their things while Bakugo cleaned up the mess on the floor with tissues and a handkerchief. Recovery Girl gave Izuku his medicine and supplements, smiling and teasing him about burning his tongue. Bakugo stood apart, staring out the window as if he could avoid facing Izuku. When they left, Izuku offered a reassuring smile and a few words to Recovery Girl, but Bakugo did not look back. Izuku held the melting ice in his mouth and followed. The rest of the day passed in a blur of classes and study. The remaining lessons were routine. Uraraka stopped to chat with Midoriya during the short breaks, and Bakugo remained with his group of friends for much of the day. Izuku spoke normally, drinking water to soothe his mouth while Bakugo kept mostly silent, glancing toward Izuku from time to time. Izuku copied the key terms for biology, using two colored pens to label diagrams and refusing to focus on the boy in front of him. Mouth still a little swollen, he worked quickly and concentrated on the board. When the teacher finished, the students filed out. Uraraka and Tsuyu lingered to talk with Izuku for a while before going home. Bakugo sat with Kirishima, Denki, Mina, and Sero, who tried to persuade him to hang out after school, but he refused and told them he was going home and suggested they study instead. Disappointed, the four left. Izuku smiled inwardly, glad Bakugo seemed to be warming to the group. He had already messaged Recovery Girl and his mother to say he was going home. Bakugo took the bag that had been hanging from Izuku's shoulder and slung it over his own. Bakugo told him to go, claiming Izuku needed rest because he had passed out and still looked exhausted. Izuku protested that he could carry the bag, but Bakugo insisted, and they walked together, Bakugo in front and Izuku trailing behind. The silence between them hung heavy, feeding Izuku's thoughts. Izuku wondered whether Kaken was tired of him, thinking that Bakugo had only been kind since Izuku's quirk appeared. He felt that Bakugo might also be carrying guilt. Bakugo had once promised to be Izuku's #1 hero, but Izuku doubted he deserved that, feeling useless and weak. He resolved he needed to help Bakugo, not lose the bond they had formed, and not be the weakling he once was. He wanted Bakugo to stand beside him, even one step behind was better than being apart. As they walked, Izuku muttered under his breath, clinging to his arm and trying to sort out his conflicting feelings. He did not want Bakugo to push himself away. He wanted the boy who had known him the longest, the one who had been both a reason to keep going and someone he had yet to forgive, to remain close. Bakugo scolded him with a familiar nickname, and when a large dog ran toward them, Bakugo chased it back to its apologetic owner and returned. Izuku listened to the breathing of the former bully, someone used to being on top in physicals, in exams. Despite everything, Izuku recognized Bakugo's strengths and understood that no one could be perfect. Izuku did not seem to register Bakugo's raised voice or the worry in his eyes. A hot tear slipped down Izuku's cheek. He felt weary of others imposing expectations on Bakugo. He did not want Bakugo to burden himself. The boy he had always chased, his longest tormentor and the person who had become his reason for fighting to stay alive, was now the one he could not forgive, and that contradiction tore at him. Izuku sniffled the nickname. Bakugo, unsure why Izuku was crying, began to panic inwardly, running through worries about bleeding, fainting, and other immediate threats. Memories of the bruises and burns Bakugo had inflicted haunted Izuku, alongside mental scars that shaped his every move. Everything had shifted after Bakugo learned that Izuku had once planned to end his life. Izuku had grown tired of being the scared child from middle school. He was not going to apologize or forgive easily. Still, he found himself stuck and confused by his own feelings. He had trained with Bakugo, walked to school with him, and texted with him. He understood better than anyone why Bakugo behaved the way he did with him. He knew why Bakugo had been so worried in past situations. Izuku asked how long Bakugo would wait for his forgiveness, staring at Bakugo's sneakers as he took a step back. Bakugo's eyes widened, but his posture remained steady, though his anger was evident. Izuku suddenly burst out in frustration, telling Bakugo to stop acting as if he had to be perfect and insisting that nobody expected him to be a god. Tears streamed down Izuku's cheeks as he voiced the pressure he had watched Bakugo shoulder. Bakugo's expression fell as the words landed. He stood silent for a moment, the alley of old habits and new expectations stretching between them, both boys carrying scars and hopes in ways only they could understand. A short, tense pause bridged the space between what had been said and whatever would come next. Izuku forced himself to confront Bakugo with the facts. He pushed free of the hold and told Bakugo that he would be a hero, that Bakugo was amazing, but that Izuku would not forgive him. Izuku felt his heart twist at how much guilt weighed on Bakugo, the guilt he would carry for the rest of his life. Although it hurt Izuku as well, he could not lie. Izuku told Katsuki that he had changed and was changing, that he understood Katsuki thought it had been his fault that Izuku had been the way he was, but nothing would change the past or Katsuki's role in those events. Izuku asked what they were now. Friends, someone who wanted him to clear a conscience so they could walk away, someone who liked him only because he now had a quirk. Tears streamed down Izuku's face as he spoke. Bakugo took a step back, pale, unable to take the words back. Katsuki had been driven to the brink by the way the world treated people without quirks. He had pushed himself to be like a god because he wanted to be a hero, yet he had almost failed to save the green-haired boy. Izuku realized that if Bakugo kept going like this, he would never reach the place he wanted. Izuku understood that he did not need Bakugo or even a quirk to become the person he wanted to be. He needed to get his life together and become a better person and a better hero for himself and for those he would help. Izuku took the bag from the stunned blonde's hands and walked away with a determined look and a small ache in his chest. It had been a few days since Izuku last spoke to Bakugo. During that time, Shinso had come to visit him in the infirmary during lunch, and Todoroki had dropped by to sit and watch for a while. Todoroki and Uraraka were especially helpful with meals. Izuku could manage the soup, but Uraraka finished the bread and pudding, and Todoroki helped him with the fruit his mother had packed and the juice he used to take his medication. Izuku told Uraraka that he still thought grape juice was better than apple juice. Uraraka responded that it depended on the container. Shoto and Shinso listened more than they spoke, and Izuku did most of the talking with his usual nervous rambling. He appreciated their company, they did not pry into his personal life, and their quiet support felt comforting. The class had noticed the tension between the explosive blonde and the fragile-looking green-haired boy. Bakugo had become even more distant than usual and had not been waiting to walk Izuku home like he used to. Todoroki and Shinso had taken over that role after Recovery Girl asked them to keep an eye on Izuku. Shinso reminded Izuku that he needed to finish the soup if he wanted to take his medicine. Izuku, who had been struggling with appetite, had been given a thick, nourishing soup he found easier to eat. He nodded and took another sip, grateful for Uraraka's encouragement and quietly happy to be eating with friends. Izuku thanked Shinso and took his medicine when Shinso handed him a handful of vitamins and supplements. He swallowed the pills with water and gagged a little at the sour taste. Todoroki held out his now bandaged hand and let Izuku look. Izuku carefully rubbed the wrapping as he inspected the injury, then offered Todoroki a small sticker he had in his back pocket. Izuku announced that he had new stickers and handed one to Todoroki. The bicolored teen looked at the sticker, the symbol of their idol, and gave a small nod of thanks before tucking it away for safekeeping. Uraraka giggled and Shinso smiled lazily as he began to look through the rest of Izuku's stickers. Izuku looked healthier than he had a few weeks before, thanks to vitamins and resting his quirk, but he still struggled with eating enough and with stress. His mother could coax him into a proper meal at home, but school breakfasts and lunches were often small or skipped entirely. He also felt tense in crowds and around strangers, especially other students his age. In the past 2 days while walking home, he had been stopped by a few middle school and elementary students who recognized his uniform. Izuku did his best to avoid confrontation, helping neighbors in his complex and keeping his head down otherwise. No one pushed him to talk about his problems. People noticed something was off but gave him space. Bakugo had withdrawn into Kirishima's group, while Izuku slowly began talking to classmates and exchanging texts with Ida. The two of them had stopped speaking to each other entirely, and anyone who brought up the situation faced a furious glare from Bakugo and a pout from Izuku. Shinso handed Izuku another handful of supplements and medicines after he finished his soup. Izuku thanked him and took them, even though the sandy, sour pills made him jittery. Todoroki asked how long he would have to continue taking all of them. Izuku explained that by tomorrow he could stop the 2 green pills, but he would still need the other supplements for a while. The brown-haired girl reached out sympathetically and asked if he could take them in liquid form to make them easier. Shinso pointed out that liquid would take longer to administer, and then added, with a wry smile, that Izuku at least looked much better than before. He had been paler than the sheets, Shinso had heard, and even Class B had come by before school to check on him. Izuku blushed at the memory of the students he had helped coming to visit in small groups. It had been nerve-wracking but reassuring, a reminder that things were different now. Uraraka joked that instead of his usual nickname they should call him the School Angel, and Todoroki's nod made Izuku more flustered. Their light teasing and steady companionship helped him feel a little less alone as he worked on getting back on his feet. Shinso laughed and joined in the teasing. Soon their break was nearly over and the group headed toward Class 1A. Shinso and Todoroki walked silently at the front while the others chatted happily behind them. Right at the classroom entrance, the 2 taller boys stopped abruptly, and Uraraka and Izuku bumped into their backs. Uraraka wondered why they had stopped, and then her smile fell as she realized who they had collided with. Todoroki and Shinso both turned and fixed the newcomer with cold, hostile stares. They had bumped into Bakugo and his group. Bakugo stood with a furious glare, daring them to make a move. Todoroki lowered his brows into a hard look. Shinso lifted his chin and regarded Bakugo with quiet contempt. Uraraka flinched, keeping her hands near Izuku to make sure he did not step forward. Though she did not know the cause of the tension, it was clear the 3 were trying not to upset Izuku. Bakugo demanded to speak with Izuku and told the others to move aside. Uraraka growled that Bakugo made Izuku uncomfortable, and Todoroki stepped forward, activating his quirk as a warning. Bakugo answered in kind, sparks lighting at his fingertips. Shinso walked up to Bakugo with a calm, measured stride and challenged him, asking what gave him the right to make demands. The situation flared, and Bakugo began to reply angrily before Izuku cut in, yelling for them to stop. Izuku scolded everyone, asking if they had lost their minds. He reminded them class was about to start and told Bakugo they could talk later. Izuku seized Uraraka's hand and pulled her into the classroom, not sparing Bakugo another look. Todoroki and Shinso glanced at Bakugo with indifferent faces and then moved to their seats. Bakugo stood stunned. It had been almost a week without hearing Izuku rant about quirks, almost a week since they had walked home together, almost a week since they had shared that moment. He had expected a confrontation. Instead, Izuku had shut it down and left. Kirishima approached cautiously, asking if Bakugo was all right and placing a hand on his shoulder. Mina, Denki, and Siro kept a wary distance in case Bakugo exploded. Bakugo's breathing was uneven and his hands sparked, but he did not strike anyone. Bakugo snapped at Kirishima, demanding why he was laughing and berating him for finding the situation amusing. To Bakugo's surprise, Mina and Denki were laughing, teasing that it had taken them so long to notice how powerless he seemed against Midoriya. Denki joked that Bakugo looked like a dejected puppy, and the others stared at him in disbelief. The group fell quiet again as Bakugo's expression darkened with fury, but instead of lashing out he sighed and pressed a hand to his face, a faint blush appearing. Kirishima, taken aback, asked if Bakugo needed help apologizing. Bakugo looked away and growled that he did not. He refused to ask for help. He felt he should be able to handle this alone. He had spent the last week replaying Izuku's absence in his head, the pain of being ignored by someone he had known for over a decade, watching Izuku spend time with others, and the shame of recognizing how badly he had treated him. He remembered every time Izuku had collapsed, every time Izuku had worried, and how much those moments had affected him. Bakugo realized Izuku was changing, growing more confident, and that hurt more than he expected. With or without a quirk, Bakugo knew he wanted Izuku in his life, but he had never said it. Now all he could think was that he might have lost his chance. He questioned whether he deserved forgiveness, whether a hero could make someone who cared feel so broken. He told himself he needed to become stronger. He needed Izuku, but he was no longer in the position he once held. Those thoughts gnawed at him as he walked back into the classroom with the others following. The lessons passed quietly. Bakugo texted Izuku that he would wait by the infirmary, knowing Izuku would have reason to be there. He stood outside the nurse's office, scowling at students who glanced his way while anxious anticipation tightened his chest. He waited for 20 minutes, each second making the choice to stay or leave more difficult. In the moment he was about to leave, a bob of green hair made him freeze. Izuku was slowly walking toward him, his hands holding the bag that bounced against his thighs. He looked nervous, biting his lip and fidgeting, but there was a determined expression in his eyes, something Bakugo had never expected to see directed at him. Bakugo, equally tense, pulled on his usual scowl and shoved his free hand into his pocket. His pride would not allow him to show vulnerability. The two locked eyes and fell silent as Izuku halted in front of him. The long hallway had emptied except for one or two passers-by. Only distant chattering and footsteps could be heard. Bakugo realized how long it had been since he had stood this close to Izuku. He wanted to reach out, to hold him, to apologize and tell him he didn't care about quirks, that he needed Izuku in his life. He hated himself because Izuku, quirk or not, seemed better at being a hero. The thought cut deeper than he wanted to admit. Izuku called him Katsuki, and the word hit Bakugo like a punch to the gut. Bakugo told Izuku not to call him that and said that it sounded gross when Izuku said his name. Izuku looked surprised by the reaction but did not respond. Bakugo tightened his grip on his bag as his nerves frayed and began to speak without a filter, asking when Izuku had gotten so close to so many people he considered freaks. Izuku answered that they were not freaks, they were his friends. Bakugo scoffed, arguing that Izuku did not have or need friends. Izuku told him that was not his decision to make and reminded Bakugo that they were not friends, asking why it concerned him. Bakugo snapped that he was better than those others and that Izuku did not need them, claiming Izuku needed only him. Izuku told Bakugo that he wasn't anything to him, that Bakugo could keep his comments and that when Bakugo had something meaningful to say he should text. Izuku then turned and walked away, unable to look at Bakugo any longer. Bakugo stood frozen as Izuku left. He felt as if he had truly lost him. He was no longer Izuku's hero. The abandonment was his own fault, and the rage in him drained into hopelessness as he stared at the empty space where Izuku had stood. He had been so close and had said nothing. He had ruined it again, and the pain was sharp. He felt himself spiraling, thinking about how he had failed to tell Izuku how much he cared and how he had not protected him better. He told himself he had to change. He wanted to be Izuku's number one. He needed Izuku. Kirishima appeared then, throwing an arm around Bakugo. The rest of their group followed. Bakugo, on the verge of snapping with his quirk, barked a harsh greeting at Kirishima, insulting him for being there. Kirishima treated it lightly and asked what kind of apology that had been to Izuku. Denki added that Bakugo could not control who Izuku chose as friends, teasing that Bakugo sounded like an over-controlling boyfriend. Bakugo pushed Kirishima away and denied dating anyone. Ashido pointed out that Izuku deserved a sincere apology that did not leave him feeling discarded. Denki and Shiro joined in, amused and sympathetic toward Izuku for having to deal with Bakugo's extreme personality over the years. The group's teasing stung, but it was all true. Bakugo had made a mess of the one person he wanted to protect most. Reluctantly, Bakugo took Kirishima's phone, which was unlocked, and punched in Izuku's number. He typed a terse message asking Izuku to text when he could talk and warned his friends not to act like he would hesitate to get a new number if they made things harder. The group watched as Bakugo, embarrassed and angry, walked away. He told himself he would change if it meant he could talk to Izuku again. He could not lose his number one. Associating with those others would be worth it if it repaired what he had broken. He had not expected a new obstacle in his way. Chapter break. Bakugo woke that morning without Izuku beside him. Izuku once again had not come by to walk with him to school. Even though he had not expected him, a part of Bakugo had hoped Izuku might show up and let them forget the recent friction. They had not exchanged texts in a week, and Bakugo's phone was now full of messages from the 4 classmates he had impulsively given his number to. In class, Izuku, Tsuyu, Uraraka, and Shinso gathered around Todoroki's desk chatting. Bakugo watched from the corner of his seat, jealous as he saw Izuku smiling and laughing with them. His small circle of friends hovered around him, trying to plan a way to get Izuku to forgive him. The feeling grew worse when Ida arrived and went straight to Izuku. The group brightened that the blue-haired boy was back, and Bakugo watched as Izuku hugged him and engaged in animated conversation, feeling more and more like an outsider. Bakugo set off small sparks under his desk, the pops matching the anger he felt at Ida and the others for how easily they were talking to Izuku. Kirishima placed a hand on his shoulder to snap him out of the trance and told him to calm down. Denki pointed out that Bakugo was steaming. Shiro suggested that Bakugo take a deep breath. Mina observed that that same attitude had made his apology to Izuku come out poorly. Bakugo grumbled but eased a little, knowing that had been exactly why Izuku had pulled away. He sighed and slumped in his seat, asking what he should do. Kirishima admitted they could not ask him to change his whole personality, and Denki received an angry glare for his comment. Denki suggested looking at techniques to manage outbursts, and Bakugo's glare made Denki hide behind Shiro for a moment. Mina agreed that staying calm enough to speak clearly would probably help Bakugo communicate with Izuku better. Bakugo considered the idea, hating the thought of spending any more time listening to them, and even more the humiliation of having to learn from them. They had already offered him multiple suggestions that he found corny as anything. The thought faded as the laugh of the green-haired boy clinging to Todoroki and Ida reached him. Memories of the closeness he had lost with Izuku and a fresh stab of jealousy swept through him. He warned the others that this had better work or he would be very upset. Later, during lunch, the group sat together for a session meant to soften Bakugo's expression. Kirishima told him to stop scowling so much, and Bakugo snapped back with a rude retort. One of them teased that he looked like a demon, and another fired back at the tease. Shiro tried to calm Bakugo, explaining that they only wanted to help. Kirishima added that if Bakugo kept scowling, he would scare Midoriya away. Bakugo clicked his tongue and sulked, his glare losing some of its edge. He called the exercise stupid, but Mina asked why he was even apologizing to Midoriya since Midoriya did not seem like someone to hold a grudge, especially if they had been childhood friends. Denki asked how he had messed things up, and another friend wondered if Midoriya was his boyfriend. Bakugo sighed, a pained expression crossing his face, and admitted that he did not know what they were. The 4 watched him, seeing a vulnerability he had not shown often. Shiro admitted surprise at how much Bakugo cared, and noted that Midoriya was cute, had a better personality, and was much kinder than Bakugo. Shiro remarked that it was nice to know the future #1 hero could listen to someone sensible. Bakugo snapped at Shiro and called him a string bean, insisting that he already knew he was not the nicest person and that he could barely tolerate one lunch PRD listening to their chatter. Kirishima explained that they were not asking him to change completely, only to try to improve himself a bit. If Bakugo showed Midoriya he was willing to change and offered a proper apology, he would at least be willing to talk. Bakugo asked how else he could make it up to Izuku. Mina suggested they focus on his anger for now and that some space might do both of them some good. Izuku, on the other hand, was elsewhere and unaware of their conversation. He had left the canteen for the nurse's office. He had not eaten much, preoccupied with talking with his new friends as much as he could before meeting Recovery Girl. He could now use his healing powers but had to use them minimally or he would collapse again. He wanted to finish his schoolwork because his family had planned a restaurant outing that afternoon. Recovery Girl had been invited but declined, saying she would go another day. When he returned to the classroom a little late, everyone was already in their seats. Izuku slid into his seat, feeling less nervous as he crossed the room. He smiled and waved to Uraraka, who smiled back from her own desk. He sat up straight but felt sluggish, likely because he had eaten little since breakfast. He was getting hungrier and promised himself to eat more so he would no longer need those huge supplements. After his mother discovered how malnourished he had been, she had pushed him to eat more, with some success. He was no longer trying to starve himself and was taking steps to improve with the support of his family and friends. Ilda, who had seen him at his weakest, had begun to monitor his meals, and Recovery Girl encouraged the behavior. Ilda's attentiveness was one reason Izuku had eaten anything at lunch. Uraraka, Shinso, and Todoroki had also gotten closer to him. They texted him and enjoyed his company. Their support was something he had not received from peers for about a decade of his life. It frightened him sometimes that the friends he had made might leave if he suddenly became quirkless again. He hated doubting them, but years of mistreatment had built up inside him. The only people who had shown him consistent affection despite his struggles were his parents and Bakugo. Izuku remembered yelling at Bakugo, frustrated by how harshly Bakugo pushed himself. Despite rough words and abrasive behavior, Bakugo had a good heart. He had saved Izuku even while calling him useless. He had bullied Izuku, yet he did not allow others to bully him. Lately Bakugo had begun to call him Izuku, and his attitude had softened at times while remaining distant. The relationship between them felt complicated. Izuku wanted to get closer to Bakugo not as a follower but as an equal standing at his side. He wondered whether their growing closeness came from his quirk, guilt over past actions, or genuine care. Izuku felt he deserved to know where he stood. His pencil scratched across paper as he copied the English sentences that Present Mike had written on the board. He thought he could always ask his father for help later if he needed it. Izuku looked forward to spending the afternoon with his parents. Simply being with them could make him smile. His father was helping his mother with some paperwork and working with companies in Japan, which kept him busy but still left enough time to relax. Izuku kept glancing at the clock until it was finally time to go home. He could barely contain himself when they were dismissed. After finishing the last sentence, he eagerly began packing his things. Todoroki observed monotonously that Izuku seemed excited. Mineta added with curiosity that he had been practically vibrating in his seat all day. Izuku explained that his father had finally come home from a business trip in America and the family was going out that day. Ilda and Uraraka, who had already packed up, joined them. Mineta left the group to walk on his own. They headed toward Shinsu's classroom so they could walk together. Ilda asked what they planned to do. Izuku said his father had promised a surprise but that he expected a restaurant, since his father always took them somewhere interesting when he returned from long trips. Shinso appeared at his classroom door, waving as he joined the group. The others greeted him in their usual ways, with Izuku and Uraraka the cheeriest. Ilda asked what Izuku's father did for a living. Izuku replied that his father was an engineer and designer for a fitness company who also did side jobs. The company had substantial business in the United States, which was why he often worked overseas, but he sent cool pictures and souvenirs. Shinso asked if Izuku had been to America. Izuku enthusiastically recalled how big everything felt there and began to talk about the heroes of America and how they differed from those in Japan. Ilda and Uraraka shared their own experiences and impressions. Gradually each friend left until it was just Izuku and Ilda. Ilda asked if Izuku would be all right. Izuku assured her that he had recovered and told her to text him whenever she was free or needed help. Ilda mentioned that her brother was adapting to the wheelchair and still recovering, so they preferred he progress slowly toward driving it independently. Izuku invited her to visit sometime, saying his mother would be thrilled. Ilda thanked him and said she would see him the next morning, wishing him fun with his parents. Izuku waved and scurried off with a smile, greeting neighbors and people who recognized his uniform as he passed. He returned to his apartment to find his parents waiting in the living room. His mother wore a sun hat and a vibrant blue sundress with matching flats. His father wore slacks and a blue polo that fit his muscular build. His sunglasses rested on peppered, slicked-back hair, giving him the air of an older movie star. Izuku announced that he was home. His father hugged him and welcomed him back. His mother greeted him and suggested he change into something comfortable, asking if he wanted a snack and if he had much homework. Izuku said he was not hungry and would change into casual clothes. Since the UA Sports Festival, when All Might had revealed his face to the world, Izuku had been recognized more often on the street, but the attention had gradually faded. He took off his school uniform and changed into an outfit similar to his father's, brushing his hair in an attempt to tame his curly locks. He checked himself in the mirror. His hair remained as messy as usual. Despite a spotty diet, he had a decent build compared to middle school, his legs especially more muscular and filling out his slacks. The combination of a thin waist and somewhat broad shoulders left him looking lean but fit. His father called them to go, and Izuku hurried to join his parents, ready for a pleasant afternoon. Later, Izuku mentioned that he was adding adjustments to his hero costume because Miss Recovery Girl wanted to add extra support for his legs to prevent knee injuries and make his kicks stronger. His father expressed pride and patted him on the back. The trio had gone shopping first. The father had picked up a custom-made jewelry set and clothes for his wife. They had stopped at a store selling old-time hero merchandise, where Izuku had scored an original poster signed by All Might and one of his sidekicks, David Shield. A shopkeeper commented that it was Izuku's mother who had created his original costume, praising Inko's workmanship. Inko smiled and recalled having made her own clothes in college, reminiscing about being young. Izuku called that amazing, and Inko explained that she had worked on costumes in her spare time and that her quirk had been helpful for larger projects. Hisashi complimented his wife, saying her suits were his good luck charms for big business meetings, and he worked a flirtatious string of compliments that made Inko blush, which made Izuku laugh at the warm, cheesy family moment. They walked together with Izuku 2 steps ahead, chatting until Hisashi stopped and looked around. Inko asked if they were close to the surprise. Hisashi confirmed they were and gently urged them forward. He approached a tanned man of similar build and, after exchanging a few words in English, the two men bumped fists. The man led the family through a crowd into a small alley and opened the door to a dim building. Izuku and his mother gasped as they realized what Hisashi had arranged. Izuku began to ask if his father had planned it. Hisashi grinned, saying he had known they would be surprised, and guided them toward a booth with skates and hoodies. He explained that he knew the rink owner because they had needed special gear for figure skaters and hockey players. It had taken time to finalize the figure skater designs, but they had ultimately taken first place that year. The man had arranged to borrow the rink for an evening. Radiating excitement, he handed a pair of skates to his son and then guided his wife into a seat. Hisashi offered to put the skates on his wife's delicate feet, speaking with fondness as he knelt to lace them. The woman, Inko, blushed and allowed him to help before he sat and laced his own skates. Izuku put on his skates at the rink, standing unsteadily as he used the wall for support. Unlike his parents, he struggled to maneuver on the ice. He had seen photos of his mother and father skating before, which explained why they moved so comfortably. Inko, especially, skated effortlessly, circling the boys and helping her only son keep his balance. Hisashi encouraged Izuku to try, laughing when the boy flailed his arms in a crouched position. When Izuku nearly lost control, his father stepped forward and caught him, pulling him into a safe hold. Hisashi teased that he had caught a little bunny and then skated with his son held close, dragging him playfully around the rink until Izuku started laughing. The boy gradually found his footing. He could not perform tricks like his parents, but he was happy to learn. The parents cheered when he managed to trace a figure 8. After a short skate, Hisashi suggested a break. Izuku followed his parents back to the entrance, watching in awe as his mother flamboyantly skidded to a stop and scraped a spray of ice off the floor, letting it bounce against the glass. Hisashi whistled at his wife, making her blush. She playfully tapped him and kissed his cheek. Both parents were overjoyed to have him back. He had secured a contract that allowed him to stay in Japan for at least 3 months. Inko praised Izuku for picking up skating quickly and patted his head. Izuku compared the balance to practicing gymnastics and to balancing on tape during training, then took off his skates. Hisashi complimented the definition of Izuku's abs but grew momentarily concerned at how skinny and pale his son appeared. The concern passed when he forced a smile and suggested they head to the restaurant. They stored the skates and carried their bags, Izuku bringing merchandise and hoodies, Hisashi holding the shopping, and Inko carrying a small bag with her custom-made jewelry. Small talk kept the mood light, with Inko chatting about how helpful Izuku had been around the house while Hisashi agreed and praised both his wife and son. At the restaurant, Hisashi had reserved a table. He pulled out chairs for his wife and son before taking his own at the circular table. They examined the menu in companionable silence until a waiter came to take their orders. The family enjoyed the simple comfort of each other's company. At one point, Inko and Hisashi discussed investments while Izuku checked his phone and sent a quick message to a group chat with his friends. Hisashi asked about Izuku's new friends at school. Izuku put his phone away and described them with enthusiasm. He explained that Ilda was Ingenium's younger brother and someone he had helped when his father had called. He said Ilda texted him a lot and they sometimes helped each other with homework. He spoke warmly about Uraraka, who liked to talk about heroes and was bubbly, and noted that Todoroki and Shinso were quieter but kind in their own ways. He admired Todoroki for his calm demeanor and for having 2 quirks, and he mentioned that Shinso liked to listen and had a cat as the wallpaper on his phone. Izuku rambled with the eagerness of someone who had finally found a place to belong. Hisashi expressed relief that his son had decent friends and cautioned him not to push himself to the point of injury again, recalling the previous scare. Izuku laughed nervously and assured his parents that his new friends were not taking advantage of him. They walked home together, talked frequently, and had helped him through some unpleasant situations at school. When Izuku began to mention a troubling classmate, he stopped himself, remembering how much his father disliked that boy. Hisashi had carried the memory of how that classmate had behaved since they were young and would not forgive anyone who hurt his family. He had done what he could to protect Izuku looking into schools, considering homeschooling, and even starting his own business so his son would have options. Hisashi took a sip of water and ran a hand through his hair, studying his son's thin frame with renewed concern. He recalled the times he had needed to scare other kids away from Izuku, and the protective instinct rose in him. Inko shifted the conversation and praised Ilda's diligence, noting how stylish the boy's mother had been in a tribute useful in the business world. She joked. She teased Izuku about one of his all-might hoodies before the food arrived and the 3 settled into the meal. Both parents encouraged their son to eat more. In the middle of the meal, Hisashi sighed. Hisashi apologized to Izuku, saying he knew his son had been through a lot over the years and that he did not want him to get hurt. He added that if Izuku trusted certain people, he would take his word for it, and that he would always back him and support him while asking him to be careful. Izuku, fidgeting with the food in front of him, thanked his father for everything and acknowledged how much his parents worried. He expressed regret that his chosen path might be stressful for them and promised he would work hard. Inko whispered her name, clutching her heart. Izuku vowed that he would become a hero and a son they could be proud of, believing his quirk would help him reach that dream. Hisashi, a peppered-haired man in his early 50s who still looked far younger, showed deep love and devotion toward his wife and son. He reassured them that as long as Izuku was his son he would always love him and be proud of him, teasing that he did not know anyone with a cuter, better-behaved child. Inko added that they only wanted him to be happy. Izuku and Inko grew emotional, and Hisashi did his best to steady the moment with a small, awkward smile. They finished their meal and stopped for ice cream at a convenience store on the way home, ending the evening on a happy note. The next morning the household buzzed with activity. Izuku urged his father not to miss the train, and Hisashi responded that he just needed a second, still more comfortable driving than taking the train. Inko reminded them about the briefcase, and farewells were exchanged as Hisashi dressed for a business meeting and Izuku headed to school. Hisashi had asked Izuku to show him which train to take, and the two walked together, Izuku chatting about his classes and classmates. When Izuku abruptly fell silent, Hisashi looked around and frowned. The simple walk with his father meant to make sure Hisashi could get to his meeting and Izuku to school was interrupted by the sudden appearance of a blonde student. The blonde's first sharp question made Hisashi dislike him instantly. Izuku quickened his pace to avoid more interaction. The blonde called after them, and Izuku tried to keep moving. Hisashi, protective and tense, stopped and turned to confront the boy, asking in a low, stern voice what he wanted from his son. The father's posture and tone were clearly protective. The blonde froze at the intensity. When the blonde realized who Izuku's father was, he looked surprised and urged his companion to hurry or they would miss the train. Hisashi brushed off the train, saying he recognized the boy and asking if he was Bakugo. The boy's face hardened in anger. Izuku stepped in, calling out to his father and insisting they leave before things escalated. He felt his chest tighten as he watched the two glare at each other, but he managed to shepherd his father onto the train, promising to text when he arrived at school. Hisashi kissed his son on the forehead before boarding and told him to text if anyone treated him badly. He would come. Izuku resolved to avoid letting his father see the blonde again. At school, Izuku hoped the morning trouble was over, but he was met with a cold look from the blonde. Izuku slipped through the crowd to avoid confrontation and hid until the blonde was pulled away by his group of friends. He reached his seat where Tsuyu asked if he was all right. Ida checked whether he had overexerted himself, and Izuku explained that he was fine and had just stayed up late out of excitement that his father was home. Uraraka asked what they had done. While his classmates gathered around, Izuku found a folded note placed on his desk. He opened it to read a brief apology for the morning and, surprised by the gesture, folded the paper and set it aside. He did not need to forgive the blonde immediately, but the apology showed some understanding of the boundary he had tried to set. By the end of class, Izuku slipped a reply onto the blonde's desk explaining that his dad worried about him. A lot. They did not speak for the rest of the day, but the exchange felt like a small step forward. The school day passed quickly. Izuku received several texts and a call from his father reminding him to stay away from trouble and reassuring him that he could handle things if needed. Someone even suggested transferring Izuku to a new school, but Izuku said he would feel uncomfortable in an American school and preferred to stay in Japan. While they ate lunch in the nurse's office, Ilda asked if she could visit his home because her mother had left a gift as a thank you for Izuku's family. Izuku agreed and said he would text his mother. Uraraka then asked to come over as well and explained that she had been hoping they could tutor her for an upcoming math exam because she was struggling. Shinso added that he would tag along. Izuku invited Todoroki, mindful of his situation and not wanting to push. Todoroki checked his phone, then nodded and said he could come but needed to be home for dinner. Izuku was exhilarated. He texted his mother, who was overjoyed at the news. Izuku returned to his lunch, placing a piece of salmon on Uraraka's tray and a mandarin on Shinsu's, a habit the others had come to expect. The group assumed Izuku shared food out of kindness or habit. Todoroki, noticing the pattern, offered his milk to Izuku, and Izuku thanked him despite not necessarily wanting to drink it. He had been forcing himself to eat more since his parents had become more insistent about meals, and the presence of his father at home had made family dinners more frequent. He did not enjoy being overly full, but he had committed himself to improve his eating habits. Shinso asked whether sharing food was a family custom, and Ilda added that some cultures showed affection by sharing food with loved ones. Izuku blushed and said he just did it instinctively and avoided mentioning that guilt about unfinished food sometimes influenced him. Uraraka called the habit cute, and Shinso joked that Izuku was like a pet sharing its food, which made even Todoroki smile. Uraraka giggled that Izuku looked like a bunny in his costume, and Izuku explained that the costume had been intended to resemble All Might. After afternoon classes, Bakugo reviewed his plan for the morning, when he had wanted to say good morning to Izuku and stay nearby to test how to act aggressively while gaining a better understanding of his own feelings toward the shorter boy. Kirishima had told him that a simple greeting was fine so long as he respected Izuku's boundaries, and the others had reminded him not to linger so much that it would be creepy. Bakugo had agreed and come to class early so he could talk to Izuku more calmly. That morning he had seen Izuku walking to school with a man who struck him as wolfish. Bakugo felt a rush of jealousy not because the man could walk with Izuku but because Izuku was laughing so freely with the stranger. Bakugo did not know the man was Izuku's father. He only knew the man traveled often for work from overheard comments. The appearance and manner of the man jarred him. He could not tell whether the man was easygoing or harsh. He felt conflicted friction toward the man mixed with pity, since Izuku had been hurt repeatedly by others in their earlier years. Bakugo wondered whether the man might have been rough with him if Izuku had not been present. What mattered most to Bakugo was that Izuku had accepted his apology, and that acceptance warmed him. During lunch he was praised by his usual group for making progress, and he found himself relaxing around them, though he still did not talk to Izuku much. By the end of the day his mood soured when several other students clustered around Izuku as they left. He watched Shinso with an arm draped over Izuku's shoulder and felt anger flare, tempered by relief that Izuku was beginning to interact with others again. Denki urged Bakugo to comment on a shirt design he had on his phone, insisting he should tell the others how he would look in it. The group bantered about the shirt, with Mina excitedly suggesting they go to a nearby diner to study. Kirishima suggested that Bakugo could share more about his plans involving Midoriya. Reluctantly, Bakugo agreed and walked out of the classroom with the others. Izuku didn't know when it had happened, but he gradually stopped being so annoyed by the four and even began spending time with them. They were certainly better than the kids who had followed him around in middle school. The friends traded questions about homework at the dining table. Ida asked if anyone had finished the packet their teacher had assigned. Shinso said he was still finishing a history paper, Uraraka offered to look at a textbook, and Todoroki mentioned he had completed about half of the packet and warned that a quiz would cover the first 2 pages. Ida then pointed out that Uraraka was approaching a problem incorrectly. Izuku's mother, Inko, sat nearby in the living room reading a novel after setting out snacks for the 5. She felt on the verge of tears at how her usually solitary son had brought not 1 but 4 studious, well-behaved friends home. Izuku had gifted the family a beautiful glassware set and some confectionaries, and Inko arranged multiple snacks at the center of the table that the teens enjoyed. Izuku tried to eat a normal portion to appear casual. Their chatter stopped when Izuku's father came home. Izuku cheerfully greeted his father and jumped up to give him a hug. Their father squeezed his son and then smiled at the teenagers, addressing them in English before switching to Japanese to speak more formally. Ida introduced himself as Ilda Tenya, Uraraka identified herself as Ochako, Shinso gave his name, and Todoroki introduced himself. Hisashi Midoriya returned the greetings, curious about what the group was working on. Shinso explained they were dealing with math homework, and Hisashi glanced over the problems. He explained that the sentence the teacher was looking for would concern the discriminate being less than 0. Shinso asked how to use the discriminate, and Hisashi took Izuku's paper to show the correct method since Izuku had arrived at the right answer. Ida thanked Hisashi for the explanation, and Hisashi mentioned he was an engineer who had made it to Calculus 3, reassuring the students that math tended to get easier over the years. Uraraka groaned that she did not believe math would ever get easier, slamming her head lightly on the table, while Ida encouraged her, noting she had completed more than half the problems on her own. Uraraka clenched her pencil with renewed determination and resolved that she could finish. Hisashi praised Izuku and said he could see that Izuku had made nice friends at his new school. He stood behind his son and, smiling, asked the group to take good care of Izuku. The smile remained, but the atmosphere shifted dramatically for a moment. Hisashi's posture and expression became intense. For an instant his features took on a sharp, canine appearance that contrasted starkly with the small, timid look of his son. The 4 friends were shocked and unsettled by the sudden change. The moment passed when Izuku's mother called to him. Hisashi relaxed, ruffled his son's hair, and returned to helping her, leaving the students to their work. Todoroki broke the silence by asking if Izuku's father was usually like that. Izuku, unaware of the impression his father had made, explained that people in the United States were often very friendly and apologized if the display had made them uncomfortable, adding that he did not usually bring friends over. Shinso watched Hisashi for a moment and then returned to his paper, noting quietly that Izuku had a nice father. The study session continued for another hour before the shaken teenagers decided it was time to head home. Later, during hero training, Izuku called out to Shuji to warn him to move left, then swooped down using his bandages and dropped into the gray-haired student's arms. Izuku had been cleared to participate in hero training again and to use his quirk, with the reminder not to overuse it. He looked healthier after gaining some weight, and the reduced stress had improved his performance. For today's training, the class had been split into groups of 4 for 2 versus 2 sparring matches intended to improve teamwork. Partners and arenas were assigned at random. Victory required capturing both opponents by knocking them out or trapping them so they could no longer fight. Izuku teamed up with his multi-armed classmate and entered a rainforest-like arena. Shuji used his extra limbs to move through the trees and search, while Izuku used his bandages to swing and scout, both careful to avoid harming the simulated wildlife since injuring animals would result in point deductions. They also knew they could not hide forever or they would lose points. Izuku reported that he could not see the other team and that they lacked information to identify their opponents. Shuji agreed and suggested they adopt a more offensive approach suited to the environment. Izuku nodded, climbed onto his partner's back, and prepared several non-lethal projectiles from his utility belt. Shuji extended extra limbs that sprouted additional sensory organs to monitor their surroundings. The pair moved vigilantly through the dense canopy, watching animals scatter below. Predators moved through the undergrowth hunting for prey, heightening the urgency of their search. Who would be the prey of the two teams? Someone signaled them to start. A net of tape fell atop the two. Zero leapt from the trees and swung around them, wrapping them into a tight ball. Ojiro jumped from above and slammed them down with his tail, driving them toward the ground. Izuku instinctively flicked his wrist and sent needles toward Ojiro, managing to strike his tail with one. Shuji clutched the smaller boy to his chest and stretched his arms and legs to their limit. Though he could not break the tape, his stretching wedged him between the trees and slowed their fall. Izuku lay on Shuji's chest and rummaged through his utility belt, pulling out a small pen-like device. With a press of a button, Shuji saw the largest scalpel he had ever seen. Izuku cut a hole and slipped out of their cocoon, landing on the nearest stable branch. He reached to snag his gray-haired partner with bandages, but Zero used his tape like a vine to swing and grab Izuku by the ankle. The green-haired boy flailed upside down and barely avoided the trees as more tape laced around his arms and mouth, disabling his access to the rest of his tools. Ojiro stayed behind and hurled himself at Shuji, body-slamming the other who was pinned against the tree. The needle lodged earlier in the blonde boy's calf had left his left leg temporarily paralyzed, and with that limb dead weight Ojiro was at a disadvantage. He used his tail and remaining leg to separate the two and try to secure the match for his side. Shuji absorbed a blow to the stomach from Ojiro's tail and managed to latch onto it with 4 arms, forcing his weight onto Ojiro. Ojiro clung to the nearest branch, his left leg useless and his tail and right leg compromised as Shuji twisted them together. Ojiro's 2 arms strained to support both himself and Shuji on a single branch. He wiggled and twisted, trying to break free. The branch could not hold them both. With a snap it broke and both students tumbled toward the ground. Ojiro used the momentum to kick Shuji into a tree. Ojiro hung from another branch with his tail while Shuji wrapped his arms around the trunk. Seeing an opening, Ojiro launched himself, spinning tail first. Shuji grew more arms to catch the tail and reflexively seized Ojiro's leg. Ojiro let go of his branch, twisted his tail and legs, and slammed Shuji into the tree before unleashing a flurry of strikes with tail and leg. Shuji received repeated, forceful attacks that repeatedly destroyed the limbs he created, leaving him exhausted and unable to maintain them. He managed a few retaliatory moves, but the barrage took its toll. Ojiro demolished one of Shuji's created arms and with a final, forceful slam knocked him unconscious. With his arms bound, Izuku's legs were still free, but he could not simply kick free without risking a hard fall. He needed an escape that would let him help Shuji. He took a breath and timed Zero's swing between 2 trees, then mustered all his strength to kick Zero's hand. A sharp crack sounded through the trees. Zero cried out and released his grip. Izuku twisted midair and used the momentum to plant his feet on the nearest tree, springing off like a tuned coil. He moved from tree to tree, hunting for a plan and for Shuji. Zero recovered, but his hand was clearly injured. He followed Izuku at a terrifying pace. The green-haired boy's lack of usable arms limited him drastically and his legs began to burn with exhaustion. He needed a place to hide and catch his breath. There was no refuge. Ojiro jumped directly into Izuku's path mid-jump and caught him. Izuku instinctively kicked. But the struggle was useless. He ended up cradled in Ojiro's arms. An official announced that Ojiro and Zero had won the round and instructed them to exit the arena, noting that someone had already been called to take Shuji to the infirmary. Ojiro loosened his grip and carefully climbed down with Izuku still in his arms. Izuku gratefully held on and expressed his thanks, then began praising how well Ojiro and Zero had fought, making both of them blush. He did not notice Ojiro putting him down until they left the arena. Bakugo strode up to the taller teen carrying Izuku, scowling as he approached. He demanded to take Izuku to the infirmary and held out his hand for him. Izuku blushed and explained that he had been distracted. He added that he had already healed Ojiro and could attend to Shiro's arm now. He hopped away from Ojiro's hold and examined Shiro's injuries. He gently probed the dark-haired boy's forearm and recognized a green stick fracture, a type more common in younger bodies but still possible since Shiro was still growing and had taken a hard kick. Izuku took a deep breath, focused, and let a cool flow of energy run through him and into Shiro's arm, stabilizing the injury and reducing the swelling. Izuku pictured the broken bone and guided a little of Shiro's fat stores to replace the yellow marrow, working to mend blood vessels in the spongy red marrow. The compact outer layer of the bone required faster restoration of osteocytes. Izuku finally sealed the outer layer, entwining the fibers with collagen. In a few moments Izuku had fully healed Shiro's arm and addressed the other minor wounds. Izuku announced that he was finished and apologized about the arm, offering Shiro a sticker. Shiro smiled awkwardly and thanked him, then suggested Izuku go to the infirmary to be checked and said that Bakugo seemed to be heading that way. Shiro told Izuku that they were going to change and pulled Ojiro toward the locker rooms, leaving Izuku and another student behind. Bakugo steadied the stumbling Izuku, supporting the green-haired boy's back with his large hands. Their faces drew near and they exchanged an intense look. Izuku felt flustered by the sudden closeness and by the firm support of Bakugo's hands. The moment ended when a shout from a teacher called Izuku over to Recovery Girl. Izuku blushed and hurried to his feet, trying to get Bakugo's attention again. Bakugo looked down at his hands and then recovered, grabbing Izuku's hand and urging him to go, warning him sternly not to collapse again or there would be consequences. During lunch Izuku was reminded by Bakugo that he could not simply eat a candy bar as a meal. Izuku replied that it had calories and a flavor he liked, while Bakugo pointed out it lacked nutrition and reminded him that Izuku was a medical student who should know better. Izuku asked for a lower voice as he concentrated on paperwork. He sat at a desk in the infirmary, pen moving across the growing pile of forms, while Bakugo ate on a nearby bed. Recovery Girl had been called away for an emergency just as Izuku arrived for a checkup, so Izuku took charge of the infirmary and helped students injured during training. Bakugo remained by his side, warning anyone who came too close. The most serious case was a broken rib, which kept Izuku busy and caused him to lose track of time until everyone else was nearly finished with lunch. Bakugo snapped at a nearby student named Shinso, who was sitting beside him, and Shinso told him to be quiet. Shinso then suggested that if Bakugo wanted Izuku to eat, making things harder for him was not the way. Shinso placed strawberry milk and pineapple juice on Izuku's desk and glowered at Bakugo, warning him that he would intervene if Bakugo bothered Izuku. Shinso let his quirk show briefly to emphasize the warning, and Bakugo turned away with a pained expression. Shinso relaxed and mentioned that Izuku liked strawberry and banana milk. Bakugo nodded in acknowledgement. Izuku returned with a clipboard and informed the group that all the second years had been cleared and had returned to class. He noted that Shuji would need to go home when he woke and that the substitute should be informed to give him calcium supplements, though Izuku would consult the substitute for a medical opinion. Izuku added that he should check on teacher Aizawa, who might have an infection in his right eye. Izuku opened a milk bottle and drank while he rummaged through a cabinet for supplies. Izuku reminded the group that lunch was nearly over and they should head to class to avoid being late. Bakugo snapped that Izuku suddenly did not need to be on time, and another student pointed out that Izuku's next class was English and that his father worked in America. Bakugo protested loudly, but Shinso intervened and offered to accompany Bakugo back to class. Shinso asked Bakugo to return his tray to the cafeteria, and Bakugo reacted by spitting on Shinso's hand, which Shinso recoiled from in disgust. Bakugo then said he would go with them and took some of Izuku's materials, prompting Izuku to thank him. Bakugo walked with a proud expression and sneered at Shinso, who rolled his eyes. Izuku led the way toward the teacher's lounge, unaware of the tension between the two boys behind him. Izuku opened the teacher's lounge door and greeted the support hero power loader with a friendly smile. He explained that he was there to check on teacher Aizawa and asked if anyone had seen him. Power Loader said Aizawa was probably sleeping in a closet again and offered to inform Present Mike or Midnight to help if Izuku wanted them to. Izuku declined and said Aizawa had looked tired so he would let him rest for now. Izuku asked Power Loader to leave some supplies on Aizawa's desk and to tell him to use them every other hour he's awake and to take the medication. Izuku took a few things from Bakugu's hands and thanked the teacher. Power Loader expressed appreciation for Izuku's help with students and sent them on their way. Walking back down the hallway toward the infirmary, Izuku tossed the empty milk bottle away and felt his phone buzz. He checked the screen and saw that Recovery Girl had returned, so he decided they could go to class before the halls got crowded. He told Bakugu that he seemed tired and that Bakugu should head back to the classroom first. One student said he would leave the supplies on the desk and return his lunch tray. Izuku protested that it was unnecessary and that it was not far. Bakugu warned that the bell would ring soon and told Shinso to make sure Izuku reached class before the halls got noisy. Shinso agreed and reminded Bakugu not to forget his tray. Bakugu growled at Shinso and urged everyone to move along as people were beginning to fill the halls. Izuku thanked Katsuki, relieved he would not be late or stuck in a crowd, and Bakugu's ears flushed at the smile directed toward him. Bakugu muttered that Izuku should hurry because other classmates were waiting, and Shinso muttered under his breath that Bakugu could be such an idiot. Later, Izuku's shoulders rose and fell softly as his head rested on his forearms. He should have been reading the science passages, but exhaustion from training and working during lunch had left him asleep. Their classmates were used to seeing him like this, but a problem fell on his friends who usually walked home with him. Todoroki suggested waking Izuku up. Uraraka proposed letting him sleep, arguing that no one had the heart to disturb someone resting so peacefully. Ilda pointed out they could not leave him. What if he had plans for the afternoon with his family or needed to be somewhere important? Shinso deadpanned that Izuku was a student, not a doctor, then mentioned that Izuku had said he needed to check on Aizawa before leaving. Tsuyu added that Izuku helped Recovery Girl in the infirmary because of his rare healing quirk. Todoroki offered to carry Izuku home. Bakugu cut across the small group and demanded they be quiet. Uraraka crossed her arms while Ilda and Todoroki formed a barrier between Bakugu and Izuku. Uraraka asked what he needed. Bakugu said he had to take Izuku to the infirmary. Todoroki glanced at the sleeping boy and asked whether Izuku had an appointment with Recovery Girl. Bakugu snapped at him and pushed the three to move before they accidentally woke Izuku. Ilda replied that Bakugu's help was unnecessary, and Uraraka argued they had reason to be cautious around him since Izuku had been creating distance. Tsuyu then suggested they wake Izuku. Bakugu admitted he did not want to hurt Izuku and confessed he had messed up, that Izuku had given him a chance to make amends and he could not ruin it. The others froze at how vulnerable he sounded. Taking advantage of the opening, Bakugu brushed past the trio, glared at them, and called Izuku by name. Izuku mumbled about supplements in a sleepy voice. Bakugu's face softened at being called by the old nickname after weeks of silence. He smiled and brushed a strand of green hair off Izuku's face with rough fingers, making the boy hum. Bakugu slid his arms under Izuku's legs and lifted him so Izuku's chin rested on his shoulder. Bakugu informed him that class had ended. Izuku, half asleep, mumbled about school and about needing to check on their teacher. Bakugu insisted that they would go home after Izuku saw Recovery Girl and took his supplements. Izuku protested, rubbing his eyes against Bakugu's shoulder and calling him Kakin. Bakugu teased that Izuku had overused his quirk and answered each sleepy question, steadying his pace through the now empty halls so as not to jostle the half-awake boy in his arms. During the quiet walk, Izuku asked between yawns whether this was real and whether Bakugu was really there. Bakugu reassured him that it was real. When Izuku asked whether Bakugu would still care if he had remained quirkless, Bakugu stopped in his tracks, shocked by the question. Izuku, already drifting back to sleep, fell quiet. Izuku rubbed his eyes and tried to wake from a dreamless nap. He jolted awake at the sight of the blonde sitting beside him. He greeted him awkwardly and looked around the room to orient himself. Bakugu stared at him, his eyes darkening. Bakugu demanded that Izuku not call him by his given name. He insisted on the familiar nickname Kakin instead. Izuku blinked in surprise at the sudden insistence, unsure what had prompted such intensity. Bakugu's voice trembled as he asked whether Izuku had ever thought he could simply abandon him after what Izuku had gone through. He confessed that they had known each other for most of their lives and that he could never forget Izuku. Tears pricked at Bakugo's eyes as he admitted he had not wanted Izuku to die and begged him to believe it. He apologized for not protecting Izuku better and vowed he did not want to see him hurt again. Izuku reacted softly to the rush of emotion, and Bakugo reflected on how their long history had often felt like one-sided friction, but his fear of losing Izuku had been real and overwhelming. A quiet, complicated moment passed between them as both tried to make sense of the distance and the closeness that remained. Izuku asked whether his constant bullying might be the reason he struggled with eating, being around large groups, and muttering to himself. He reminded Katsuki that if he had not seen him jump that day, Bakugo would have forgotten him, and then added that this was not even what he was most angry about. Bakugo asked if that was not the case. Izuku explained that, despite Bakugo's bullying reaching an uncalled-for extreme and that he should have known better, he still considered Bakugo his #1 hero. Izuku placed his hands over the blonde's and told him that he could stand on his own 2 feet and that Bakugo could not take responsibility for everything that went wrong or keep isolating him. He said Bakugo had pushed away anyone who might have become his friend even in middle school, but that, because Bakugo had been his biggest tormentor, he had also kept him from other dangers at times. Izuku acknowledged that Bakugo was not at fault for everything but was still accountable for his past actions. Bakugo repeated the word torture, and Izuku answered that they both knew Bakugo had been controlling, reckless, and bad at making friends and talking normally. Izuku noted that Bakugo was changing and recognizing his mistakes, and that it was hard for him to carry so many expectations tied to his quirk. Izuku said he did not hate Bakugo and wanted to be treated with some respect while also having other friends and learning to stand on his own. He asked if Bakugo had noticed that he had improved at dealing with people and crowds. Bakugo admitted grudgingly that Izuku had gotten better. A small smile crossed Izuku's face as he confessed that he had not exactly forgiven Bakugo and should not have exploded at him. He had been frustrated and had felt as if he had not grown at all, as if everyone could still walk over him despite his quirk. It allowed that some of his anger was left over from how Bakugo had treated him before his quirk awakened. Bakugo stared into Izuku's eyes and told him that he had never thought Izuku weak. He confessed that he had been jealous since they were little. Izuku, baffled, asked to hear more. Bakugo admitted that Izuku had kept chasing his dream even when others discouraged him, that he had always been ready to help and could tell when someone needed help, even Bakugo himself. Bakugo blushed and said he had noticed that Izuku was struggling when he was no longer #1 at everything, that he too had suffered when he felt he lost that spot, and that the thought of Izuku leaving him in some way scared him. Izuku reached for him with a soft call of the nickname Kaken. Bakugo asked that Izuku stop calling him by his given name in that way, and promised to be Izuku's #1 hero while trying to be less reckless. He opened to say more, but the moment was cut short when the infirmary door swung open. Aizawa entered in his hero gear, tired as ever, with All Might right behind him. Aizawa announced that he had been right about someone still being there and greeted both young students. He groaned at the hour and asked why they were still present and where Recovery Girl was. Izuku, blushing and pushing Bakugo away gently, greeted Aizawa and All Might and offered to give them both a checkup. He said he also needed to treat Aizawa's stomach and asked whether Aizawa had been taking the prescribed medicine. Bakugo left for the bathroom to collect himself while Izuku busied himself with Aizawa's eyes, using his quirk and applying eye drops. All Might, needing privacy, closed the blinds around a bed in the corner. Bakugo still did not know All Might's normal day form. After the treatment, Aizawa visibly brightened, his dry eyes were less red and his complexion improved. Izuku instructed him to shower and wash his hair before patrol and hurried to the medical closet to fetch 4 bottles of hygiene products he had ordered specifically for Aizawa. He told Aizawa these should help with some pain and cracked skin and that he should take them home and use them well. Aizawa nodded, touched by the care. Izuku cheerfully added a small reward as he often did, and reminded Aizawa to come back if he experienced migraines or eye problems. Aizawa told Izuku to make sure he took care of himself first and remarked that he should have gone home long before. Izuku laughed with his mentor despite a slow, aching pain in his lower abdomen that reminded him of the constant exhaustion the older hero endured. He washed his hands with warm water to warm his cold, shaky fingers, and steadied his expression. He was close to exhaustion but determined to finish one last task before going home, quietly grateful that Bakugo and Aizawa were not in the room to see that level of fatigue. He opened the curtain to find All Might sitting on the infirmary bed. The older hero appeared thin and fragile, having gained some weight but still low on strength and with low blood pressure. Izuku helped All Might into a comfortable position on his back and placed a hand over the scarred skin. He let his ability flow gently through his fingers and into the damaged tissue, focusing on encouraging the few remaining cells to regenerate into a usable stomach while supporting the recovering respiratory system. The work required subtle manipulation of cell growth and epigenetic activation, and without a perfect genetic blueprint it was difficult, but Izuku concentrated on salvaging what he could. Minutes stretched as Izuku held his healing, his hands visibly trembling as fatigue crept in and the seconds felt much longer. He pushed himself until the pain in his own abdomen eased a little. All Might murmured that they should stop because Izuku did not look well. Izuku asked All Might to stay still and told him to think of a candy and a sticker to look forward to once the work was done, speaking in the calm, coaxing tone he used with those in recovery. He understood how risky the task could be and how long it might take him to recover afterward, but he kept going with careful, steady effort. Despite how much he had recovered after helping others in the past, Izuku still found that these sessions left him easily exhausted, and he focused on finishing this one with as much care and restraint as he could. Izuku could not stall the healing for All Might any longer. He knew that, slow as it might be, it was one of the few things actually helping the man absorb calories and nutrients and aiding his weakened breathing. Izuku pushed through another 10 minutes as the energy in his arms felt like ice, lighting the small space between them. All Might's cracked skin took on a healthier hue and softened. When Izuku had done all he could, he pulled away and his shivering body collapsed into a chair, struggling to catch his breath. All Might rushed to Izuku's side, expressing immediate concern for the boy. Izuku reassured All Might that he was all right and had only overexerted himself a bit, though he pushed the older man away with a shaky hand. All Might fretted that the boy was shaking badly and suggested taking him to a hospital. Izuku told All Might that he only needed to rest a little and that he should be fine in a few minutes, and he offered what he hoped was a comforting smile, though it looked strained. Before All Might could say more, Katsuki Bakugo barged in angrily, shouting that he had left for less than an hour and returned to find Izuku looking like he was dying. All Might scolded Katsuki for the tone, and Katsuki shot back that Izuku looked like a patient now too and that they should go home and see if hospitalization was needed. Izuku placed a hand on Katsuki's forearm and told him to calm down, asking to go home so his parents would not worry. Katsuki said that he had already called his aunt and that their belongings had been brought by someone else, so they could leave. He handed Izuku a granola bar, a banana milk, and 2 capsules for his supplements, telling him he would get everything ready. Katsuki also told All Might to put on a shirt because he looked creepy. All Might laughed and pulled on his baggy shirt as Katsuki fussed like this was nothing new. All Might told them to make sure Izuku got some rest and traveled home safely. Izuku, with hands still stiff, produced a sparkly star sticker and a lollipop and offered them. All Might accepted with a hearty laugh and thanked Izuku again. When they arrived at Katsuki's home, Katsuki announced their return as he began taking off his shoes. Katsuki's parents rushed to the door, surprised and delighted that their son had brought a friend. Katsuki's mother was thrilled to see Izuku again and wrapped him in a warm hug, remarking on how much he had grown and asking about Izuku's mother, Inko. Izuku replied that Inko was doing well and thanked her for having him. Katsuki's mother said it had been almost a decade since she had last seen Izuku and called him a sweetheart like his mother, asking about school and UA. Izuku said school was alright and that Katsuki helped him and that he had made a lot of friends. Katsuki's mother encouraged him to tell their son if he ever had trouble and welcomed him to visit anytime. Katsuki and his mother bickered affectionately about not bringing Izuku over sooner, and a relative named Masuru apologized and offered a warm welcome as well. Izuku commented that it was nice to see that his aunt was as energetic as ever, and they talked briefly about Izuku's father having returned from America and staying in Japan for a few months. Katsuki's mother said she had been surprised to see Izuku on television during the sports festival and mentioned how memorable it was that he had ended up sitting on All Might's shoulders. Katsuki grabbed Izuku's arm and urged him to come along. He led Izuku to his room and closed the door behind them. The room was neat and simple, with a few posters, some skull designs, and one of All Might gym equipment, a laptop on an organized desk, and solid colored sheets and rugs. Katsuki dropped their things by the door and pulled Izuku down onto the bed. Izuku's complexion had improved from some fresh air and the train ride, but Katsuki still thought he looked fragile. Izuku admired Katsuki's room and told him he liked what Katsuki had done with it. Katsuki remarked that the All Might poster had been a limited edition, implying Izuku knew it well. Izuku recalled spending hours choosing a gift for Katsuki and had given it to Katsuki's mother earlier in the living room. He let the memory pass, closed his eyes, and leaned back on the bed with his legs dangling over the edge. He was almost asleep when his phone buzzed. His friends were checking that he had gotten home safely, and his mother had texted to ask if he would be back for dinner. Izuku considered whether to stay. Staying would spare his parents from seeing him so tired, and it would give him more time to study for the demanding anatomy class he had been struggling with. He knew Recovery Girl had diluted the amount he had to learn, stretching a semester's worth of work into a whole year for him. It was still a lot. Izuku asked if he could stay over. Katsuki looked up from his phone in disbelief and stammered that Izuku could, then wondered if he should ask his father to call Izuku's parents. Izuku blinked and pushed himself off the bed despite his body begging for more rest. He said he would call them and ask to borrow the bathroom. Katsuki indicated the third door down the hall and told him to take a shower while he informed their guardian. Izuku thanked him and left for the bathroom, leaving Katsuki alone and suddenly panicked. When Izuku returned to the bedroom, Katsuki was no longer there, but a futon had been laid out beside the bed. Izuku had barely gotten permission to stay over from his parents. His mother had been scolding his father on the other end of the phone. He had omitted the fact that he was staying at the Bakugo household. Had he told his mother he was staying with a friend a year earlier, she would have cried with joy and asked a million questions. Now she simply asked if he would be back in the morning and urged him to be kind to whichever family he stayed with. His father had given him a long list of warnings and questions before his mother intervened and wished him a good time. Izuku found the three adults in the kitchen. Masaru wore a black apron and was cooking dinner while Mitsuki moved around cheerfully, helping with small tasks. Katsuki was setting the table and contributed to the conversation when prompted. Mitsuki greeted Izuku warmly and Masaru gave a friendly wave, mentioning that dinner was nearly ready and that it was good Katsuki's clothes fit him. Izuku apologized for barging in, and they assured him it was no problem. Grateful that Katsuki had brought someone over, they admitted they often asked about him but knew how Katsuki could be. Katsuki, meanwhile, looked like he might short-circuit. Izuku was wearing a t-shirt that was a little big for him. The shirt hung loosely and looked several sizes too large, making him appear smaller in it. Mitsuki teased that it had been a long time since Katsuki had brought a friend over and that she had begun to worry he had lost all his friends to his attitude. Katsuki protested, raising his voice to say he could hear her and telling her not to be nosy. Mitsuki laughed and told him to go shower because he smelled of sweat. Katsuki huffed and left the table, grumbling at his mother about being embarrassed. Mitsuki returned her attention to Izuku, asking if he and Katsuki were in the same class again. Izuku confirmed that he sat right behind Katsuki and described how close they had become in class. Mitsuki said she was glad Izuku was around to support their son and noted that Katsuki sometimes refused to ask for help even when he needed it. Katsuki had already apologized to Izuku for his attitude, and Izuku blushed a little and promised he would help if Katsuki asked. Mitsuki thanked Izuku and then, with a playful curiosity, asked if Katsuki had a crush on anyone in their class. Izuku stammered that he did not know of any crush, only that Katsuki had many friends and they spent time together at lunch and after school. Izuku enthusiastically described one of their classmates, Siro, who had a quirk that produced tape from his elbows and used it to make traps and swing around. Izuku imagined asking Siro to provide medical tape and teaching him how to bandage, imagining the practical benefit of carrying first aid supplies. He apologized for rambling and Mitsuki ruffled his hair, amused. They talked about Izuku's parents and his mother's work helping his father with product design and potential stock investments. Izuku explained that the company was well known and that there was a trend for machines aiding dual movement for bodybuilders. He thought it was worth the risk. Masaru asked about work in Mitsuki's field. She said it had been busy with the new fashion season, with models needing different makeup for each scene. Mitsuki recalled an incident in which a model had an allergic reaction to eyeshadow and she had spent an hour helping to flush her eyes with water before the assistant took her to the hospital. They had called in a backup for the shoot. Mitsuki suggested, with encouragement, that Izuku could try modeling for a unisex clothing line and said she was sure his mother would approve. She complimented Izuku on his appearance and mentioned that it could boost his public profile, but Izuku politely declined, saying he was not comfortable with large crowds yet. Mitsuki and Masaru both assured him they would support him and that sometimes heroes were present at such events, but Izuku preferred to watch from the sidelines. Masaru then asked his wife not to press him too hard. "Not everyone is as loud as our son," the Bakugo father observed. "If only our brat could be as sweet as him," the Bakugo mother added, praising Izuku for being an obedient child. Izuku stammered that Katsuki was not that bad and listed his strengths, pointing out that he was strong, smart, hardworking, and had been improving his attitude and making friends. Masaru smiled and told Izuku that it was good to hear, admitting that Katsuki was a handful but asking him to keep being a good influence. Izuku responded respectfully. Katsuki's parents smiled at the blushing boy, and Katsuki's mother remarked to Masaru that Izuku was adorable and asked to see a picture of his hero costume. Izuku happily pulled out his phone and showed the couple the photo, and the adults complimented how cool it looked. Katsuki announced that he was finished in the shower and told them to stop bothering Izuku and come eat. The four enjoyed dinner. The mother and son were lively as ever while the father and the visiting friend watched with a few quips. When dinner ended, the adults nudged the boys to do their homework and study. The boys obeyed, with a bit of bickering between the blondes, and began working through the mountain of assignments. Katsuki settled at his desk and Izuku laid out on his futon. About 2 hours later, Izuku asked Katsuki for help with a math problem and showed him the question. Katsuki scoffed at Izuku's struggle, pointed out the answer on his already completed worksheet, and tossed it over to him. Izuku thanked him. Izuku then asked how much more homework Katsuki had left. Izuku explained that he needed to study anatomy and start an outline for a history essay. Katsuki said he only needed to study English before going to sleep. Izuku noted surprise that Katsuki was almost done and asked what time he would sleep. Katsuki said he would sleep earlier than Izuku and might study a bit before homeroom. Izuku offered a lamp so he would not disturb him, but Katsuki told him to leave the lights on and urged him to sleep, teasing that Izuku looked like he was going to pass out when he arrived. Izuku protested that he was fine and needed to study now to avoid more work later. Katsuki teased that Izuku would get white hairs before his father did at that rate, and Izuku responded. Katsuki told him to go to sleep at some point and warned that if he was still up when Katsuki got up in the night, Katsuki would make him go to bed. Izuku answered like a chiding parent in return. Then Katsuki asked if he could call Izuku Izu when he wasn't in costume, explaining that he could not call him Deku outside of hero work. Izuku blushed, surprised at the new nickname, and agreed tentatively, offering Izu as a name. Katsuki warned him not to let anyone else call him that, just as he did not let anyone else call him by that familiar nickname. Izuku thought Katsuki was being strange but decided not to overthink it and returned to his work. They continued studying for another hour. Izuku worked on the outline for his paper until he looked up and saw Katsuki leaning back in his chair, arms crossed and legs sprawled, fast asleep. Izuku laughed softly, got up, and, careful not to wake him, used his training to lift Katsuki gently over his shoulder. He carried his childhood friend to the bed and loosely draped a sheet over him, knowing Katsuki tended to kick around in his sleep. Izuku thought it was sweet to see Katsuki so defenseless and reminded himself to focus on studying and getting enough rest for the busy day ahead. The next morning Katsuki woke Izuku with insistent calls to get up or they would be late. Half asleep, Izuku rubbed his eyes, smiled drowsily, and wished him a good morning. He pushed himself up from the futon, stumbled around, and nearly needed guidance. Katsuki clicked his tongue, grabbed Izuku's hand, and dragged him to the bathroom, scolding gently about the point of studying if he could not get up for school. Izuku thanked him for the help as he hurried to wash up and change. Katsuki reminded him to eat, and Izuku promised to. Izuku closed the door on a bright smile, not noticing that Katsuki was even redder in the face than normal as he hurried to get ready. The two boys prepared quickly. Izuku could not finish the hearty breakfast the Bakugas had prepared. He ate a small rice ball while Katsuki, with a much bigger appetite, ate heartily. Izuku apologized and the Bakuga mother laughed, saying she should have remembered not all teenagers ate like her son and to eat what he could. She promised to make it more reasonable next time, and the thought of a next visit made Izuku smile. Katsuki urged Izuku to move faster or they would be stuck in the crowd. Izuku waved goodbye to Misuru and the others and pulled on his bright red shoes. He smiled when he saw Katsuki waiting for him by the gate. Izuku asked if he had waited for him, and Katsuki said of course, that they could not walk together if Izuku did not arrive. The two left together, Izuku running to catch up with a bright laugh. Later in the cafeteria, Denki commented to Katsuki that it looked like Katsuki and Izuku had made up, noting that everyone was surprised to see them enter class together that morning. Mina and the others looked on expectantly. Denki added that Katsuki had even used his old nickname again. Katsuki looked down at his meal with a face of annoyance. He had gone to the infirmary earlier to check on Izuku because Izuku had said he wanted to eat with friends. Katsuki agreed and said he would eat with them. It wasn't like he was starting to like them. No, not at all. Denki asked whether Bakugu had apologized, which earned Bakugu a death glare. Bakugu looked down at his lunch, took a bite, and the others reminded him that they could only help if he explained how things were going. Bakugu admitted that he had made up with Izuku and that Izuku had explained why he had been avoiding him. Denki teased that Izuku might have finally gotten fed up with Bakugu's ego. Bakugu snapped that, surprisingly, Izuku was not like that. Bakugu called Izuku an idiot who worried and thought too much, and said he wasn't sure how to fully make it up to him but that he had promised to try. The others reacted with wide eyes, then smiles and cheers of encouragement, but Bakugu ignored them and shoved food into his face. Denki joked about Bakugu inventing a nickname for Izuku, and Bakugu warned him not to. Denki accused him of being overprotective. Mina asked if Bakugu was planning to confess to Izuku anytime soon. Bakugu choked on his food and reacted loudly. Kirishima scolded Mina for asking such a personal question so casually, but Mina dismissed that and insisted everyone could see Bakugu had strong feelings for Izuku and should act before someone else did. She slammed her hands on the table and looked Bakugu dead in the eye, urging him to get his act together because Izuku would not be single for long. Shiro and Denki watched as Bakugu froze, and Denki laughed while Kirishima anxiously checked on him. Meanwhile, in the infirmary, Uraraka reminded Izuku that no matter what, they all had his back. Izuku, catching up on paperwork while eating, looked up in surprise and thanked them. Ida added that if anyone threatened or hurt Izuku, he should feel free to come to them. Todoroki and Chusu nodded in agreement. Shinso ate with an apathetic demeanor that nonetheless suggested he cared. Izuku smiled and promised to help them if they were in a bad situation as well. The group quickly changed subjects and continued to chatter happily. Todoroki asked why Izuku had come to school with Bakugu that morning. The others looked at Izuku with awkward curiosity. Izuku said it had just happened that way and that they were working through their issues. Tsuyu pointed out that he had been ignoring Bakugu for the last few days, which Izuku had not realized they had noticed. Uraraka said it had been obvious to everyone. Izuku explained that he and Bakugu had been childhood friends, meeting in preschool. Back then Bakugu had been confident and had the loudest voice in their class. Izuku had become part of his friend group and they had been inseparable, always talking about becoming great heroes, designing future hero costumes, playing heroes and villains, and having sleepovers. They had gone to the same elementary school and stayed close for a while. Bakugu had gotten his quirk early and sometimes showed it off, becoming more aggressive but also stronger than anyone Izuku knew. Izuku smiled and said Bakugu had always been amazing and had toned down a bit since middle school. He felt lucky they were able to attend the same high school. Uraraka marveled that they had known each other for so long and wondered if they were best friends. Izuku reflected that they had been best friends as children, but their relationship had changed over time. He said that by the end of middle school something had happened and one thing led to another, and now they had a complicated relationship that was not exactly friendship but something close. Shinso bluntly asked whether Izuku and Bakugo had ever dated in the past, prompting surprised looks around the table. Ida shouted that such a personal question was inappropriate, and Todoroki expressed that Izuku deserved better than someone who treated him poorly. A few personal questions followed, which made Izuku flustered and overwhelmed. He quickly insisted that nothing romantic had happened and that he had never thought about romance with Bakugo. Shinso asked if Izuku was unaware of how others viewed him, and the group encouraged Izuku to let them know if anyone ever asked him out and to make sure anyone he considered treated him well. Uraraka said he deserved the best, and the others agreed. Izuku thanked them and returned the sentiment, promising to support whoever his friends chose to be with and to stand up against anyone who was mean. When the bell rang, signaling the end of their break, Izuku told his friends it was time to head back to class so they would not miss history. The group packed up, waved goodbye to Shinso, and rushed back to class. Izuku slid into his desk, pulled out his history textbook and notebook, and prepared for the lesson. The slight pink dusting his cheeks stayed the whole PRD. Izuku Midoriya explained to Recovery Girl that, rather than focusing solely on cell regeneration, he had been concentrating on mitochondrial function and shifting glucose to cells to aid their recovery, though he remained uncertain about neurons. He had been excused from hero training that day to take a class with Recovery Girl that focused on quirk honing. Recovery Girl examined Izuku's bright, determined eyes and asked him what he thought the most important task for a healer was. Izuku answered that it was to help as many people as efficiently as possible. Recovery Girl laughed and corrected him, saying the most important thing was to survive. She reminded him that if a healer died, the people they could have helped would be left untreated, and urged him to take care of himself. She suggested making a list of priorities for difficult situations and warned that it could be a harsh but useful way to decide in tight spots. Izuku, surprised, agreed and promised to remember. Recovery Girl softened when he called her ma'am and told him not to call her that. She then presented 2 cases she had seen that day and asked him how he would treat them without relying on his quirk. They continued their lesson until the bell rang. Since it was the last class of the day, Izuku packed his things with a light step. He had a lot of homework and his mother had sent a message that the family would be having dinner with the Ida family on Friday. He wanted to finish his main assignments so he would not worry over the weekend. A quick glance at his phone showed that his father had offered to pick him up, which made him even happier. As he was about to say a quick goodbye and leave, the classroom door swung open and Ida Tensei hurried in front of his desk in a stiff, formal bow, announcing that he would be honored to walk home with Izuku and the others if Izuku wished it. At the same time, a breathless Bakugo Katsuki arrived near the desk and demanded that Izuku walk home with him instead. Ida insisted again in his own mechanical style, and Bakugo snapped back, insulting Ida. Ida took offense to Bakugo's language and nudged back. The exchange grew heated. Earlier, in the locker room, Denki Kaminari had suggested to Bakugo that he ask Izuku to walk home with him and even hinted that Bakugo could propose doing homework together on the way. Eijiro Kirishima had backed the idea, calling it a good chance. Bakugo had rolled his eyes but admitted he had been thinking about when to ask. Shiro Hanta told him there would be an opportunity when they returned to class, but urged Bakugo to hurry in case others already planned to invite Izuku. Denki teased an idea of a cafe to make it more romantic, which Bakugo dismissed. Ida, overhearing, blurted out that by romantic, they meant being interested in Izuku as more than a friend. Bakugo blushed and growled, telling Ida it was none of his business. Ida declared he could not stay silent if someone was pursuing a close friend in that way. Bakugo bristled and warned him away. Ida felt an unfamiliar surge. Normally he would not involve himself in such matters, but the thought of Bakugo wanting to walk home with Izuku stirred him. He changed quickly out of his training jumpsuit with a single-minded determination. Bakugo hurried as well. Their classmates watched in a mixture of amusement and confusion. Denki tried to stop the escalating scene and grabbed the first thing he saw: Shiro's glasses to stall. Shouts of protest followed as friends scrambled to block the door. Someone taped the door shut behind Bakugo as he rushed out, still with his jacket open, using his quirk to speed ahead. The red-haired student ran after him, caught the glasses, and kept running until Todoroki Shoto intercepted him. Todoroki admonished that heroes should not steal and created an ice shard, which Ida used to slice through the tape sealing the door. Ida then powered up his legs and bolted after Bakugo, buttoning his shirt as he ran. Bakugo was already using his quirk for speed, but Ida pushed himself to keep up. Back in the classroom confrontation, Bakugo's insults escalated into threats as old memories pressed on both boys. He lashed out with words that hinted at violence, and Ida replied sharply, accusing Bakugo of acting like a criminal. The exchange brought painful recollections to Bakugo of how he had treated Izuku in the past, mockery and isolation that gnawed at him now. Anger at himself and at the situation rose up. Izuku stepped between them, steadying himself and gathering composure. He explained that he was meeting his father and could not walk home with anyone, and that he had only come to say goodbye. His calm intervention halted the argument immediately, and the two boys stopped. A classmate muttered an exclamation, and another thanked Izuku for the offer while stammering that the rest of the class was coming back so he could walk with them. Izuku responded that it was good to hear and to tell Mr. Midoriya hello. He cheerfully said goodbye and threw his bag on his back, leaving the classroom and greeting his friends on the way out. A rival cursed and vowed not to let Izuku win next time, calling him Four Eyes, and another classmate returned the sentiment in kind. Izuku ran into his father's arms and greeted him excitedly. His father squeezed him and asked how school had been while taking the boy's bag and turning them toward home. When his father joked about the heavy bag being full of bricks, Izuku explained that it only contained textbooks and that he was trying to finish assignments early to free up the weekend. He reminded his father about dinner plans on Friday with the Ilda family and hoped that Ilda's older brother could come, since he had not seen him since he first woke up at the hospital. His father said he had heard a bit about the two brothers from Izuku's mother and noted that Izuku and Ilda had grown close. Izuku confirmed that he and Ilda often had lunch together with friends Uraraka, Tsu, Todoroki, and Shinso, who had even visited their house. His father commented that they all seemed like nice kids. Izuku added that their quirks were cool and that he regretted missing training since he would have liked to add more notes to his quirk journal. His father laughed, ruffled Izuku's hair, and said it was good that Izuku kept up with his hobby, teasing that it would come in handy if Izuku ever wanted to work for him in the States. Izuku insisted he wanted to be a hero, and his father responded that no matter what, Izuku would always be his little boy. He offered the possibility of hiring Izuku as a quirk analyst if Izuku ever needed a tamer job and said Izuku would flourish in the United States. Izuku admitted he had considered studying in the States but that fear of rejection made him unsure. He told his father he would think about it. His father said he would be proud no matter what, and Izuku replied that he knew. His father pointed out that they needed to stop at the grocery store before heading home, mentioning the list Izuku's mother had left: eggs, milk, onions, and fruit. He joked about the differences between Japanese and American grocery stores and teased that supersized portions explained why people in the States looked different. Izuku reminded him that their mother had asked them to buy fruit too. Izuku looked up and saw Recovery Girl and greeted her with joy. Recovery Girl replied that she was shopping for groceries grannies needed to eat too and asked who the young man with him was. Izuku introduced his father as Hisashi Midoriya and explained that Recovery Girl was his teacher and mentor at UA. Hisashi kneeled and, with a flourish, introduced himself as the patriarch of the Midoriya family and complimented Recovery Girl. She responded warmly, saying it was nice to meet Izuku's father and that Inko had told her a bit about him. Recovery Girl smiled and patted Hisashi's head, and he joked that he hoped she had only heard good things. Hisashi suggested they shop together so they would not leave such an esteemed woman alone, and Izuku winced inwardly at his father's charm. He offered to help Recovery Girl with her groceries, but she said she had come with someone to help and then spotted another familiar face. Their homeroom teacher Aizawa arrived carrying a basket of groceries. Recovery Girl introduced him, and Aizawa greeted Izuku with a dry remark calling him a problem child. Izuku pointed out that Aizawa should be sleeping, and Aizawa explained that he had wanted to nap but his shift started in an hour, so he was doing his shopping instead. Hisashi introduced himself properly, expressed concern about the difficulty of juggling school and work, and asked if Izuku was giving the teacher trouble. Izuku reassured him that Izuku was a promising student. Hisashi beamed at the praise and urged the teacher to take good care of his son, saying parents and educators together raised the next generation. Izuku demurred at the excessive praise, but Hisashi continued, saying he had never seen Izuku so excited to go to school. Izuku protested and lightly pushed his father to stop embarrassing him. Hisashi admitted he worried like any parent, asking whether Izuku was getting along with his peers. Recovery Girl chimed in that Izuku had great friends who always ate with him and that someone with a flashy quirk seemed to have taken a liking to him. Seeing the time, Izuku said they had to go because his shift started in 30 minutes and they still needed to check out. Hisashi declared it had been fantastic to meet them but that he and his son had to return to Izuku's wife waiting at home, and he playfully pushed Izuku forward as they prepared to leave. The group exchanged goodbyes, and the Midoriyas finished shopping quickly before leaving the grocery store. On the walk home, Hisashi called for Izuku's attention and asked him to promise that if he ever dated someone, he should make sure that person met both his mother and father. Izuku protested, surprised, but Hisashi pressed him for a promise. Izuku reluctantly agreed and said he promised. Hisashi accepted that answer. His father felt protective and affectionate toward him. Bakugo Kaken asked Midoriya Izuku if he wanted to come over that weekend. Izuku replied that he might be busy. Bakugo pressed for details, and Izuku explained that aside from studying for their upcoming test he should be free, and offered to study with Bakugo and his friends. Bakugo insisted they study alone, saying he did not want to deal with the others. Izuku reminded him not to insult their friends and said they could study together if his aunt was okay with it on Sunday, though Saturday was uncertain because he had plans and might be home late. Bakugo, already annoyed by the idea of Izuku spending time with someone else that week, sked inwardly. The thought of Izuku going out to dinner with that bespectacled classmate stung, and he resolved to make sure nothing went wrong. Uraraka and Tsuyu called out to Midoriya as they walked, and Midoriya waved back. He told Bakugo that he had to speak with his friends before class, and they parted ways. Bakugo headed toward his own group of friends near the school gates. Mina asked if he had any luck. Denki chimed in that Izuku had been walking to school with Bakugo all week, and Bakugo confirmed, adding that Izuku still spent time with others and was going to dinner with the bespectacled student that night. The group reacted in surprise. Bakugo said he had only recently learned of the dinner, that it sounded like a family meetup, and then told his friends he planned to intervene on Sunday no matter what. Todoroki and Ida had mentioned the restaurant, a fancy place with a French-sounding name, and Mina found its location online. Bakugo examined the phone and declared he was going there. Denki and Mina got excited about a stakeout. Kirishima cautioned against the idea, but Bakugo brushed him off and walked to class with his mind already set on Sunday. In class, the students gathered around a math problem. Ida began explaining the solution to a brunette classmate while Tsuyu looked on. Izuku listened as the others worked through the problem and admitted he found math difficult. Uraraka fretted about understanding it, and Ida encouraged her, noting that different people had different strengths and that she should be able to do well on the exam if she focused. Izuku said he needed to study math more and suggested they all study together after school. The brunette enthusiastically agreed, and Tsuyu and Todoroki expressed support. Izuku then explained that he might not be able to join because he had a family dinner planned on Saturday and other plans with Bakugo on Sunday. Uraraka was surprised and asked when this had happened. Izuku said Bakugo had asked that morning to study together over the weekend. Todoroki noted that Bakugo usually studied with his friends, and Ida suggested that inviting everyone to a joint study session could be beneficial, both for checking answers and for socializing afterward. Tsuyu agreed it would be fun. Izuku hesitated but said he would ask Bakugo, then sent a message. Bakugo replied that they should study together another weekend and told him to hang out with the group instead. Izuku apologized to his friends and said they should definitely meet up the following weekend. The group agreed and dispersed. Izuku then received a text from Ida expressing excitement for dinner and asking if Ida's older brother could join to play video games. Izuku laughed, happy to hear Tenya's elder brother was doing better, and replied that he could not wait. He also told Ida that his parents were picking him up after class and were looking forward to Western food. Ida responded that he was looking forward to the evening as well. Uraraka then sent a message to two others saying they were going to crash the dinner. Later, Izuku rode in his father's car and announced that he had scored an 85 on his exam. His father praised him warmly, remarking that he had not only inherited his mother's looks but also her intelligence, and went on to compliment her as a great cook and strong person. Izuku protested that his father was flirting with an absent mother, and his father laughed and said everything was already in the trunk, asking Izuku to have faith in him. Hisashi admitted that he loved watching Izuku's mother and hung on every last word she said. Izuku rolled his eyes and asked if Hisashi had always been that smitten. Hisashi went quiet for a moment and answered that he had not. Izuku then asked when Hisashi had begun to love his mother so much. Hisashi explained that they had first met in high school but had not begun dating until college. Even then, it had taken many dates before they could say "I love you." He said that love was an investment. The more one gave, the more one could receive if they were lucky enough to choose the right person. He warned Izuku to be careful of people who might take advantage of him and reminded his son of a promise to tell him if he ever started dating someone. Izuku agreed uncertainly and thought to himself that he did not feel like anyone was interested in him. Hisashi parked the car, patted Izuku's green hair, and said he would go greet the beautiful woman waiting at the door. Izuku laughed and stepped out of the car to wave to his mother. Across the street, Bakugo glared at the high-end restaurant as he and his friends watched families arrive. Denki fussed with his clothes and pointed out that the Midoriya and Ida families were not expected for another 30 minutes. Mina adjusted hair and clothing and reminded Shiro and Denki that she had called ahead and reserved a table for two under Shiro's name. Mina instructed them to stay out of sight and hearing range and to stick to the story that they were on a first date, warning them not to act overly couple-y or share too much information. She also told Bakugo and the others to keep an earbud in and phones out of view. Kirishima urged caution and suggested they should not intrude on someone else's privacy. Bakugo dismissed him and was determined that they could help, but the group bickered about whether the plan was appropriate. Denki, Shiro, and the rest reassured each other that they had enough money and that everything would be fine. The Midoriya family emerged from an expensive-looking car, the parents fussing over their son. The Ida family arrived soon after, with the eldest son in a wheelchair and his younger brother pushing him. The two families greeted one another warmly. Bakugo tightened his jaw and glared at the friendly scene. Inside the restaurant, the Ida older brother thanked Izuku for everything he had done during his recovery and expressed gratitude for his support. Izuku dismissed it and said he was just glad the older brother was improving. Ida's mother insisted that Izuku had already done more than enough and asked after his well-being, noting that he seemed to have regained some color and strength. Izuku admitted that he had been eating better and recovering steadily since his father's arrival, and that the care and medication from Recovery Girl and his mother had helped. Ida's mother mentioned that her son talked about Izuku constantly and that the two of them were in a study group together, offering tutoring help if needed. The families took their seats and the conversation shifted between light-hearted concern and parental nagging. Sensing Tenya Ida's lingering pain, Izuku discreetly used his quirk to relax his muscles and ease his discomfort. Tenya noticed the gesture, put a finger to his lips, and smiled in thanks. Tenya's father warned that it was not good for someone to push themselves too hard and mentioned that his younger brother often said Izuku tended to overexert himself. Izuku's mother and the other parents exchanged knowing comments about how their sons ignored cautions and always wanted to get back to their responsibilities. The children rolled their eyes as the adults continued to jabber. Shiro and Denki entered and took a table across from the families, leaving an empty table between them and the others. Denki quietly noted into his phone that, while it looked like the families were sitting opposite each other, everyone was conversing as one group. Shiro stole discreet glances and observed that Izuku and Ida were sitting on opposite sides of the table with little contact between them. Kirishima believed that Ida would not make any impulsive moves with his family present and added that it was unlikely Ida felt romantically toward Midoriya anyway. Mina reminded them not to underestimate the situation and framed caution as a basic hero principle. Bakugo insisted that helping a friend was important and declared that he would try to win Midoriya over on Sunday. The others teased him, and Bakugo bristled but did not back down. When Izuku and Ida stood and walked toward the restroom together, Denki panicked quietly about what to do next. Bakugu snarled that they should follow them, but Shiro hesitated when a smiling waitress approached and asked if they had decided what to order. Kirishima intervened and stepped between Mina and the others, insisting they were taking things too far and that invading someone else's private life was not what heroes did. He told Bakugu to focus on his planned time with Midoriya on Sunday instead. Bakugu fell silent and stared at the ground, his phone lying idly by his side. Kirishima sighed in relief and gave Mina a side hug, saying they should wait for the two extras before leaving. Mina sighed, a little upset but understanding, and resigned herself. Kirishima took out his phone and announced the good news that they were ready to go when Denki suddenly noticed familiar faces approaching. Denki recognized them and explained that he had been telling Ilda they looked familiar, and Shiro added he had mentioned the same thing. The newcomer joked about what a small world it was and asked if there was a reason they were not with the others. Denki said everyone else had other plans. He waved and struck up a conversation, asking what the pair were up to. The newcomer explained that their families were having dinner together and that Ilda's parents had insisted on bringing Izuku because he had helped their family a great deal. Izuku blushed and tried to downplay the praise, saying he had only done what he should. The newcomer insisted Izuku had helped tremendously and that their brother's recovery might not have gone as well without him. An Ilda family member called for Ilda and Izuku to stop disturbing what they jokingly called a date and to come back to eat. Ilda and Izuku both protested that it was not what it looked like and fell into embarrassed explanations. A parent scolded that dating was inappropriate for students and reminded them to focus on studying, while another voice urged them not to neglect their studies and to be respectful. Ilda and Izuku exclaimed again that it really was not like that. Kirishima and his friends exchanged looks and admitted quietly that their cover story had probably been too convincing. Bakugu ran a hand through his hair and said at least the two parents had promised to keep it a secret. Shiro observed that Ilda did not seem keen on dating and Denki, who had hidden his face against the table in embarrassment, tried to explain that it had only been a cover story. He added in a more serious tone that he cared for Shiro as a friend but was not romantically interested. Shiro reassured him that the feeling was mutual and suggested they just eat and get out of. Denki brightened at the mention of trying French food for the first time and asked whether they should stay on call. Bakugu instructed them to meet up afterward to make a game plan for Sunday and to text if anything unusual came up. Denki confirmed and shut off his phone, keeping an eye on the Ilda and Midoriya families laughing and chatting. The silver-haired Midoriya was telling a work story while the older blue-haired brother matched his energy, and Shiro noted how well the families seemed to get along. Denki agreed and mused about how it was different when Uraraka was involved, then added that Izuku had also used his healing powers on Ilda's older brother, which explained the gratitude and admiration. As their server brought their food, Denki suddenly nudged Shiro under the table to get his attention. Denki pressed a hand to Shiro's mouth and said he thought he had heard Ilda's older brother suggest that Midoriya and Ilda would make a good match. Shiro reacted in surprise and asked if Denki was sure. Denki said he was trying to hear more and, after a quick plan, pretended to take a call with Shiro while he used the bathroom. Before leaving, Denki discreetly set his phone on the seat behind the Midoriyas and secured it with some tape so it would not fall, hoping to catch more of the conversation. At the family table, one of Ilda's parents praised Izuku, listing his strengths and joking about how good-looking and well-off he seemed, assuring Ilda that she would always have support from their family if she ever needed it. Izuku's father, Hisashi, spoke up with a protective tone and asked that Izuku be watched over if anyone tried to bully him. Hisashi added that Izuku was so important to him and teased his wife with a small affectionate gesture, which made the table burst into laughter and embarrassed Izuku. Denki returned from the restroom, cut off his disguised call, and sat back down with Shiro. Shiro picked at his food. The meal had suddenly lost its appeal. He thought to himself that Bakugu was going to be in trouble.